I was 14 years old when I had to live with my grandparents. I had to live with them because my sister was in college and my parents were divorced. They lived in this old bungalow-type house. It was one story, and we have stairs that immediately go up to the attic. An attic which no one really uses. We just put stuff in there. It's too hot and stuffy up there anyway. The sole window up there didn't really help. The attic had an old, creaky wooden floor that I remember that I had to polish with a coconut shell, because that's how we do it here in the Philippines. That, and my grandparents are very traditional. The door to my room was near the stairs leading up to the attic. Like, you open my door and then face right, and the stairs would be immediately there. I hated that every time I left my room, I would see them, because it's almost like I would expect something to crawl down from there. One night, my grandparents had to pick up my aunt's family from the airport, but because of the hellish traffic here, they had to leave at 7 p.m, and their expected arrival back home would be around 5 a.m. at most. So, as a 14-year-old girl being home alone at night, I told them that I would be safe and fine. We live in a gated community, and we have plenty of guard dogs, so everything would be okay. Or so I thought. Before they left, we already had dinner, so I was stuck with cleaning the dishes and all of that. Whilst I was cleaning them, I could hear a bunch of neighboring dogs barking. It didn't really bother me, because they're dogs, they always bark. Once I was done, I locked every door and window and turned off all the lights before heading to bed. As I got into my room, the lights were on and everything looked normal. My anime posters were on the walls, my closet was untouched, my bed was next to my barred tinted windows that we had to tint because I was on the first floor, and my grandparents wanted to make sure no one would peep into a young girl's room. They were barred too, because my uncle, who used the room, always escaped through there to get to parties, and this was my grandparents' solution to that. Of course, they never got them removed. Nothing was out of place to alarm me. Everything was normal. That is until I turned off the lights. As soon as I hit the switch, a silhouette of a man was illuminated by the streetlight outside. He appeared to have thick curly hair, a skinny build, and I thought that I was having a hallucination. I turned the lights on again and he was gone, and then I flipped the switch once more to reveal him once again. I sighed in relief. I obviously was just tricking myself, or perhaps something else was casting a shadow. I double-locked my door to be safe, one with a doorknob lock, and one of those door latch type locks, and tucked myself in. It was hard to fall asleep because of all the dogs barking outside. They weren't our dogs, it was the neighbors. But I was finally falling asleep when I heard something move from above me. Something in the attic. I pushed the thought to the back of my mind that I must be tricking myself, and I hugged my pillow, trying to tell myself that it was just rats. These rats seemed heavy. They were also pushing my furniture around. My heart sank when I heard them hurriedly go down the stairs and stop at the bottom. I covered myself with my blanket and I waited for something. I was also wishing that my parents had given me a phone, but I waited with bated breath. Suddenly I heard my doorknob being gently fiddled. I wanted to vomit when I heard a click, followed by a quiet turn of the knob. The knob turned but didn't budge. When they noticed, they tried to push it. This time I had finally stood up, shaking. I was a kid, home alone with no phone, no means of defense. All that was saving me was this thick door from the old days. I softly pushed my body up against the door and locked everything up again. I didn't want to make a sound and didn't want to scream and didn't want him to know I was there. I don't know why he stopped, but he did. I didn't get back to bed though. I sat there at the door waiting. It felt like forever. I heard footsteps ascend the stairs, but I was just still sat there. I saw something move from the corner of my eye. There, out the window, the shadow was back. I forced myself not to look, and all I could think of was thank goodness they were barred. I don't remember what happened after that. I think I probably passed out from exhaustion, or was just so scared that I fell asleep. Either way, I remember the next day when my family and I were finally having breakfast, and I casually brought it up with my grandfather that I thought I heard footsteps in the attic last night. My grandmother scoffed. It's probably rats. I never brought it up again. I didn't want them to worry. It probably was. Right? Our dogs were caged up near the gate and were far from my room, so they wouldn't have seen anything. The only dogs who could have been near my room, via proximity, were of course the neighbors. There was also nothing outside my window that could cast a shadow to look like a man. And lastly, the attic window, when I investigated, was propped open. When I was in high school, probably around 9th or 10th grade, my best friend had a boyfriend that was older and lived fairly far away, so he was not from our school or anything. Not sure how they met. When we would spend the night at my house, or we would go to the mall or to see a movie, he would often stalk us. We would be in my house, and he would drive by slowly. Keep in mind he lived nowhere near there, so it was no accident. This was while they were dating. I think he wanted to check up to make sure she wasn't cheating or something. He would look to see if my car was at my house, etc. One time we were at an amusement park that was local, and he just happened to show up there. My friend, bless her heart, was kind of dumb and naive, so she honestly thought it was some happy accident he showed up there while we were there. Obviously, I knew this was intentional. It was pretty annoying that she and I could do nothing without him showing up or following us. I used to talk to him, and he told me he wanted to poke holes in their contraception so that he could get her pregnant so she wouldn't leave him. I told her what he said, and she still carried on sleeping with him. Finally, she got some sense and decided she wanted to break up. Well, that did not go well. She had a grandmother and was elderly, in the early stages of dementia at the time. Lived alone, but only a few minutes from my friend so they could keep an eye on her and take care of her. Well, apparently, the crazy boyfriend began visiting the elderly grandmother regularly on his own. No one knew he was doing this, since she was just a confused old woman. He was saying all kinds of things to her to try and manipulate her. It worked to the point that the grandmother thought he was a great guy, and that my friend and her mum and stepdad were awful for treating him badly. The grandmother had some kind of episode where she was yelling at my friend's parents about everything. It got to the point where they had to take out a restraining order, so that the guy could no longer approach her or the grandmother. I'm not a scaredy cat, but I was getting a little nervous myself because he did know where I lived, and he knew I was probably one of the ones encouraging her to break up with him, and I worried he may retaliate. But lucky for everyone involved, he took the hint and stayed away. But that is truly a shady tactic to manipulate an innocent old woman with dementia into turning her own daughter and granddaughter and confusing the poor old woman. What a piece of work. This happened when I was between the ages of 11 and 12. This was a little over a decade ago. My family and I moved to Philadelphia from New York, and we loved the neighborhood. The owners of the house next door were wonderful. They didn't live there but rented out their house, and they were also from New York. She told us that she had new tenants moving in. However, the new tenants never showed their faces and never came out during the day, only at night. One time, me and my dad were out late at night, and he parked his car in the back of the house. He left out the car and unlocked the gate when we see a car pull up. Not just any car, a luxury car. We both looked at each other and pretended nothing was out the ordinary. There were two people in the car, a guy and a girl. The girl had a hoodie on and the guy had a cap on. It was dark and we couldn't see their faces. They said, "Hey, how are you?" And my dad replied and they quickly chatted. However, the man kept his head down. I introduced myself briefly and the woman swiftly said goodbye and they went into their house. We told our mum what we saw, but then again, he could have been renting out the car, who knows. There was another night where I heard people talking in the back, and there were a few cars parked in the back, brand new, shiny, luxury cars. There were multiple different nights where you'd hear voices and people in and out of the house at night. During winter it snowed a lot. It was around 8 a.m. where me and my siblings would go out and shovel the snow, only to discover our side shoveled, or during the fall wherein our leaves would be swept up. Another day me and my dad were going out again, and this time the same guy from last time came out and a different guy came out. The man said that he needed something fixed in his house, and then went on to say, "Hey sweetie, how are you?" I greeted him back. My dad said sure he could fix it, because we weren't going anywhere important. My dad went in there and was in for about an hour. When he returned, the guy paid my dad with a wad of cash and thanked him, and the dude quickly went inside. We got in the car, and then my dad told me the dude gave him money for something simple and didn't want him going around the house because the house was a mess. My dad had no intention of walking around the house, but okay. My dad said there was a small door in the wall. I thought it was cool because houses with secret compartments and things of that nature, and watching movies are cool. Another few weeks go by, my siblings and my dad were in the basement just chilling, and there was this banging and loud scream coming from next door. We thought it was odd, perhaps kids playing or something. My dad left for a brief moment and next thing you know, police cars swarmed our block and there was a helicopter ordering someone to get out. Scared, me and my siblings came outside and you see cops going in and out the house. The cops told us to stay back because all you see were military-grade weapons and just bags and more bags in the street. The cops asked me a few questions about them, and I just said they didn't bother anyone, and that I heard a loud scream before they came in. He was just with us and making sure we weren't scared. Then my dad came and was screaming, asking what happened. They told him about what was going on and that we were safe. The news came and started asking my dad questions or whatnot. My mum raced home from work because she saw our house on the news. And after that happened, we learnt they seized over $1 million of heroin, cocaine, weed, and many others. The weapons were dangerous, and usually the military has them, not even cops carry them. The US Marshal came the next day and told us to make sure nobody comes inside the house or knock on the door, and if they do to call them. But that was crazy and wild. This happened a few years ago, when I was still living with my mum, and I had borrowed her car to go see my then boyfriend for the evening. It was around midnight when I got back to my neighborhood, so the roads were empty. And that's when I noticed this dirty, run-down, rusted, white utility van that a maintenance guy would drive, following me. I never ever saw the driver's face, but I got this immediate sinking feeling in my stomach, because something felt wrong about this van. Now I was only 20 at the time, but I knew better than to just drive straight to my house and letting this person know exactly where I live, no matter how desperately I wanted to just go home and ignore it. But I also wasn't 100% sure they were actually following me yet. I didn't want to jump to conclusions because it was late and I was alone and being paranoid. So I drove to a shopping complex a few minutes out of the way that's well lit and has a public library to see if I were followed there. I thought I lost the van, but decided to wait in the parking lot for a few minutes because I had a bad feeling that I just couldn't shake. Sure enough, The van showed up and was driving in random circles around the parking lot looking for me. This scared me quite a bit, so I drove towards the big mall here that's always got security and police, because it was the midway point between where I was and where I lived. I parked in a pretty well-lit, although empty 24-hour McDonald's parking lot where I had a great view of the roads and the mall, but I wasn't super easy to spot and waited to see if the van showed up looking for me. It did. And of course, this would be the only time security and the cops are nowhere to be found, which was half the reason I decided to head there in the first place. Realizing whoever was driving this van was 100% actively following me in the middle of the night, I knew I couldn't just drive home. This wasn't an option. And that's a terrifying realization. Luckily, the police station is just a few minutes away from where I was, so I try to discreetly drive away, hoping the van hasn't noticed me yet. I wasn't that lucky, because it wasn't before long the van was back in my rearview mirror. At this point I'm panicking pretty hard, and my anxiety is high. I finally pulled into the police station parking lot, and seconds later the van came to a stop in the middle of the road for no more than a few seconds. I'm guessing just long enough for them to realize where I led them, and they took off immediately very fast. I did make it home safe and without seeing the van again not long after. But this whole ordeal took up at least an hour of my night. It was after 1 a.m. by the time I made it home, and I was terrified the entire time. I don't know what this guy's specific intentions were, but honestly, I didn't need to know. I knew it was nothing good, and I likely avoided a very bad situation. If you think someone is following you, it's not stupid or paranoid to make sure you aren't right. Who knows what might have happened if I'd have led them to my house or gotten out of the car. I was having a conversation about urban legends with my boyfriend and his friend who was in town. He's a stand-up comedian. And the topic of, no, I actually know someone who that happened to came up. Here's my story. Back in 2003, I worked in a clothing store, known for its inexpensive t-shirts, at a mall in a smaller northern city in central Massachusetts. I'm a taller woman just a hair shy of 5'11", with a small/medium hourglass frame, light hair, light eyes. I was 18 when this happened. My friend that I worked with met up for me to pick up my check and hers and scheduled a little shop. She, no joke, was 4'11" and still looks like she's 12, even though she's now in her 30s. We were both pretty active in the hardcore scene at the time, but I looked a little more clean-cut than her, as she likes piercings and I liked tattoos. We were parting ways since we parked in the same lot but different sections. I gave her a hug and walked away, and heard someone call, "Miss?" and turned around. It was a short, fat guy with a bottle in his hand coming towards me. "Miss, I got this perfume for my wife. Will you smell it for me and tell me if it's good?" "Nope, piss off," I replied, and kept walking to my car, taking my Nokia out to call Jackie as I walked over. The dude persisted and started hitting notes of agitation in his voice, following me still, increasing the speed of his pace, saying he just needed me to smell it. Jackie answered, "Some guy is following me, drive down my row." He heard me on the phone and stopped following me. Jackie drove up alongside me moments later and described the guy, asking if it was him, which I confirmed. "He got into some van and drove away," she said. In hindsight, we should have called the cops, but information on people being taken and such in 2003 wasn't what it is now. Instead, we just went on the running joke that I was worth more than her because she had a ton of facial piercings. So when you saw that chain email forwarded going around about men chloroforming young women to sell them, I hope you actually paid attention. It almost happened to me. This happened to a friend of mine who lived in the same neighborhood as me when we were about 8 to 9 years old. My friend Emily and her family lived just a few houses down the street from mine. We lived in a neighborhood where almost everyone knew each other. The biggest worry we had was that some outsider would come into the neighborhood and cause trouble. Some people even left their homes unlocked because they felt that safe. There was an incredibly nice family that lived directly across the street from Emily's house. A mum, a dad, and a 16-year-old son, and their other, mentally challenged son who was 22 years old, called Tim. Tim was always home, because he wasn't employed due to his disability. But his parents were working full-time, and his brother had school. All day, every day, he would be outside, waving and smiling at anyone who drove or walked by. Big smiles, showing all his teeth and sometimes giggling, just out of the pure excitement and happiness of interacting with other people, since he spent most of his time alone. He was not creepy. One day, Emily was sick and didn't go to school. Even though she was only about 8 or 9 years old, Emily was allowed to stay home sick by herself. Plus, her mum was going to be home around 2 anyway, since she only worked part-time and the neighborhood was safe. Right? Emily locked all the doors except the one that led to the garage. They used this as their front door because it was an easier way to access the home. You just park your car in the garage and go through the side door. This is obviously not the safest way to protect your home from intruders, but we literally all did it. As if a flimsy garage door could keep anyone from getting in if they wanted to. The worst part is that they had an outside cat and kept the garage door cracked just enough for him to get inside for his food and shelter if he needed it. So Emily's asleep, feeling sick with a fever. All the doors and windows are locked, except the door leading to the cracked garage door. Tim was bound to know she was home alone, since he was outside the front of his house the whole time. Emily wakes up to a pounding on the front door. Startled, she walks downstairs and looks through the peephole. It's Tim. She cracks the door, and he says something along the lines of how he notices everything, and would guard her home since she's home alone. She says thanks, but there was no need, and to have a good day. It was beautiful weather. He got angry. You think I can't do it because I'm dumb? But watch and see because I'm not dumb. She apologized and didn't mean it like that, but that she had to rest now. She dozed off and woke up to a noise downstairs in the kitchen, which happened to be the room the door from the garage led to. She hadn't heard the garage door open, but she was sick, so she figured she was in a deep sleep and simply hadn't noticed. Being completely disoriented from time, she looked over at the alarm clock. It was only 10:20, far too early for her mother to be home. At that moment she heard the noise again. She didn't call out. She had been sleeping in her parents' bedroom and ran into the bathroom, slamming the door loudly. She then remembered that this particular bathroom door did not have a lock on it. The noise she made slamming the door alerted the intruder to where in the house she was, and the big footsteps started to ascend. She moved quickly and quietly to her parents' closet, which was on the other side of the room. She closed the door and hid behind some clothes, all the time thinking how someone would have gotten inside. She remembered that the garage door was cracked for the cat, slightly, but not close enough for a thin person to slip underneath. Tim walks into the bedroom. Tim is tall and thin, and she can see him through the slatted closed doors. She sees him holding a weapon, and did everything she could not to scream. The sheen of it made her panic. He quickly went to the master bathroom where she was just moments before. These cookie-cutter houses only had about 3 floor plan layouts, so it wasn't hard for him to find. He looked inside the bathroom and didn't see her, then started making loud, throaty noises, like someone would if they were frustrated or angry. While pacing the entire house, she stayed in the closet for hours, even after she heard him exit through the front door. She stayed there until her mother got home. She was crying hysterically and told her mother what happened. Had she not been so upset, and had one of their kitchen knives not been left by the front door, her mum might have blamed it on being delirious from a high fever, because no one would expect Tim to do that. The police were called and an official report was filed. I'm not sure if he had any charges pressed against him, because after she told me the story once, she refused to talk about it again. I overheard her parents a few times talking about the situation to my own parents, but never heard what the consequences were. Emily was so traumatized she went to therapy afterwards for several years, and still wouldn't talk to anyone about it because she didn't want to remember nor relive the experience. We even moved into an apartment together years and years later for college purposes. She never talked about Tim. It was like he never existed, and I never asked. I noticed she always locked the front door, which you should, of course, and the one that led to the patio and balcony, even though we were on the 7th floor, and always locked her bedroom door, to which she added an additional lock. And when she locked all of these doors and windows, she would always check 3 times, every single one. I often wonder if there was more to the story that Emily wanted to tell me. We were kids after all, and sometimes kids don't know how to explain the things they don't understand. It's terrifying to think about what his intentions were, and if he perhaps did find Emily, and something else happened. As horrifying as the experience must have been for her, it made a huge statement in the neighborhood for everyone to be more careful. I will always make sure everything is locked. I worked at a local pizza joint in my small hometown back in 2016. About 6 months into the job, I had an older man around 70 years old come in. He walked up to the counter and had asked me for a soda. He then sat at a table. A few minutes later, he came back up to the counter and asked what my name was. I told him, as we didn't have name tags. I didn't think anything of it, and he walked back down to the table to sit down. 10 minutes go by and he came back up to the counter and said, "What would you say if I were to ask you on a date?" Immediately I got a bad feeling. I uncomfortably laughed it off and told him no. He then left. A few hours later I saw him walking back up to the pizza place. I told my co-worker that I was uncomfortable and that I didn't want to serve him. She agreed with me and I hid in the back while she spoke with him. After a few minutes, I came back and she told me what happened. She said he asked for me, and she told him that no one named Courtney works here. And then he said, yes she does, she's 5'3", has purple hair, and she's off on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I'd never seen this guy before, but somehow he knew my work schedule. I immediately called my dad. He's an officer, and I wanted to see what I could do. There wasn't anything I could do but avoid him whenever I was working. I had to let everyone know the situation and how uncomfortable I was. However, when he came in, they forced me to handle him. The next time he came in, he was telling me about his 18-year-old girlfriend in the Philippines. He then went to the restroom and was banging around in there for at least an hour. And then he just left. I would occasionally look out the window to see what was going on outside, and I would see him in his car with a newspaper in front of his face, watching me. Everyone would tell him to leave me alone, and that I was only 18. He didn't care. He would follow me around the grocery store, which was right next to the pizza place. I got used to all of this. Eventually, he put in a job application at the pizza place. I read the resume. In the experience section, there were a few normal things. However, the last few things sent shivers down my spine. He had listed janitorial experience and chainsaw experience. My coworkers and boss thought this was hilarious, so they put it on the wall, and whenever I couldn't perform up to their standards, they said they'd give him a call and give him the job. I soon left after that, so I'm not sure if he continued to try and chat with the other girls. A few months later, I started working at a rescue center. I was talking to a few co-workers and they brought this guy up. The exact same thing happened to one of them at the previous jobs. Some 70-year-old stalker. Creepy. Back when we moved into our house, we were introduced to all of our neighbors by them coming to our house with cookies or brownies like they do in the movies. This was a nice, quiet, middle-class neighborhood, made up of mostly older white people and new families. I mention that because we are the only black family in the neighborhood. No black wives, husbands, not even adopted children. We didn't find it strange though. It was just very clear that we were different. I was about 13 at the time and my brother 15. Our backyard is half an acre and is fenced, but is connected to 2 other houses' backyards. Each one is half the size of ours, but we all have separate fences. So to picture it, there's a T-shaped fence separating our backyards. The house to the left was the home of an older man named Tom. He reminded me of Willie Nelson without the cool pigtails. He liked to be outside, shirtless, usually with a denim vest, no matter what the weather. He was a well-built man, but visibly kind of frail, and we found him funny in a creepy old guy kind of way. As I got older, he started making comments. I played in the backyard with my 2 dogs a lot, and Tom could see me from his living room window that faced his backyard. Whenever I glanced over, I would see him in the window, just standing there watching me. When he noticed that I saw him, he'd come out and talk to me. I tried to get away before he could come out, but sometimes I was too slow. I didn't want to make it too obvious, so I would just walk. But if I didn't make it inside, he'd yell at me to come back. I never got too close to the fence. I'd speak from a distance. He'd ask me about school, which grade I was in, and tell me I was pretty. Ask if I was old enough to have a boyfriend, and if I have an older sister or older friends that looked like me. I'd laugh it off, but after a few questions he'd stop talking and just stare at me silently. I'd always give an excuse about needing to go inside. He'd nod and stand at the fence and watch me walk back into the house, and this happened almost weekly. My mum loves to decorate, so she changes the house decor every few months. Pretty annoying actually. In one of her designing sprees, she decided to get new sliding glass doors for the back porch, which required her to take the curtains down in the living room. It took them forever to be installed, but she figured there was no point in putting the curtains back up if we were going to have to take them down again. Fine. Our family TV was in the living room. I didn't have a TV in my room, so I'd oftentimes watch TV late into the night, in the living room with my brother. One night my brother went to bed early, so I decided to watch TV by myself. Around midnight or so, I turned the TV off to go to bed. I got up from the couch, turned off the light, and turned around to see another light on. Not in my house, but in Tom's, in his living room. He was there, standing at the window, watching me. I told my parents about it later, and they shrugged it off. I'm an anxious soul by heart, so oftentimes I chalk things up to my anxiety. Fine. Soon after that, my dogs started getting sick. I'd take them out to play and they'd start throwing up or having diarrhea. We knew it wasn't their food because we'd given them nothing new. We threw away the dog treats we'd recently purchased just in case it was the problem, but it didn't stop. I noticed though, that every time I let them out alone, they'd run straight over to Tom's fence, jumping up and down, wagging their tails. He'd slowly walk outside, reach over the fence and feed them his treats, which was odd as Tom didn't have a dog. I told my parents and Dad went to talk to him, telling him the dogs were getting sick, and he apologized and stopped feeding them. They got better. A few weeks later I was coming home from high school. My brother was in the grade above me. I was a senior, so he was in college at the time. When I got home, no one else would be home for a few more hours. I had a routine. put my book bag upstairs, change clothes, let the dogs out of their cages out on the porch, get a snack, and then let them back in. For some reason, I was unusually excited to see my dogs that day, so instead of going upstairs, I went straight to the back porch. I got to the door to open it and saw Tom sitting on the ground in front of my dog's cages. I froze. He didn't see me. I looked over to see if the door was locked. It wasn't. I locked it as slowly as possible so it didn't make a noise, but it did. He looked over and saw me standing there. I ran upstairs and called my parents. My mom's a nurse, so she didn't have a phone on her. And my dad just never answered his phone. I didn't think it was serious enough to call the police, so I just hid. And after a moment I heard him knock on the door. It wasn't loud or aggressive though, it was almost friendly, like he wanted to talk. This time I tried calling my dad again and he answered. I was crying and telling him Tom was on the porch, and he said he was heading home now, but that he was over an hour away, and I just sat in my room waiting for my dad. The knocking stopped, my dad got home and Tom was gone. I don't know what happened between Tom and my dad, but he stopped coming outside and talking to me. He never stopped watching though, always standing in his living room. Sometimes I'd see him through the window and he'd wave, but always with the light on, just so I knew he was still there. It was August of 1992, and I had just moved to Sydney, Australia from my home in New York. My grandfather had recently passed after a prolonged cancer battle. He was my favourite grandparent, and almost 30 years later, I still miss his warmth and stories. I still dream about him to this day, and in my dreams I tell him how much I miss him. During this period while he was dying, my parents had been making plans for our family to move from our home in New York to Sydney, Australia, as my dad is Australian and had been offered a job during a previous visit to his side of the family. The combined passing of my grandfather and the sudden uprooting of my comfortable and familiar life to live halfway across the world had left me feeling insecure and alone. Forced to adjust to a life in a different cultural environment, away from all my childhood friends, and old school, was different for a 10-year-old. To help alleviate these feelings of homesickness, my parents got me a puppy, a chocolate Labrador called Milo. He was only 6 weeks old when we got him, and like all puppies, he was a handful. My mum would get angry at me, as he would constantly howl during the night, and would rip out the stuffing from our sofas. We would wake up to tufts of couch foam scattered all over the living room. My mother was a manic depressive, and losing her father, my grandfather, had only compounded her grief and rage at the world. She threatened to send the puppy to the pound, or give him away to one of her friends. When my mother would lose it, I would take Milo out for a walk near our home. We wouldn't venture too far, just a few blocks to this park I knew, where we could be alone, and I could think. The park is hard to describe. It was a public park with a swing set and some walking trails, but had the appearance of a semi-cleared forest with a lot of unkept shrubs, old trees with spindly branches that would reach out in all directions, as well as wild grass that you could get lost in. It was not huge, but not exactly small either, and for a kid it was an easy place to lose yourself in with all its dark corners of backwoods. The name is Harborview Park if you wish to Google it. The park had two entrances, a steep stone staircase that led to a sidewalk above, and another staircase that led to a sidewalk below. I was walking Milo on the sidewalk above the park, when suddenly a car pulled up in front of me. I think the car was white, and I don't remember the make now, but it was some kind of sedan. An overweight middle-aged man with a huge walrus moustache and sunglasses got out the driver door in front of me and looked straight at me. I froze, and I still remember him saying, I'm not gonna hurt ya. And that triggered some primal panic in me. My parents had always told me to be very wary of strangers, and even at 10, I was fully aware that children were prone to being taken and have their lives ended. I grabbed Milo up in my arms and bolted down the stone stairs, descending into the deep bowels of the canopied park below. My heart was beating so loudly I could feel its reverberations in my throat. I darted behind some shrubbery near a broken tree trunk. I was holding Milo so tight against me that I was worried I might crush him. Through the branches I could make out the street above and see the white sedan was idling above, but the man did not follow me. I hid there in the shrubbery, almost completely still for what seemed like half an hour. The car above never moved, but no one came down into the park either. Eventually I ran through the long grasses and through detritus of this half-park, half-forest floor. Sunlight poured in from the other end of the park like a light at the end of a tunnel. There were stairs at the southern end, just like there were above. I walked down the street, nervously glancing around for a white sedan. It was twilight now, and the sun was setting beneath the red brick house that made up my neighborhood. I resolved to make it back to my home and ran the 5 minutes back, never telling my parents what I thought had nearly happened to me. About 2 days later, I heard on the local news about an abduction. A girl disappears while getting off her bus a few suburbs away from me. There are people being taken all the time, and of course there's no proof it was in any way related to my own experience. There's also no proof that the walrus-moustached man in the white sedan was even out to take me. It's possible he was going to ask a 10-year-old for directions, and I was nervous. However, I don't believe a normal grown man would stop and ask a 10-year-old for directions, or anything else of an innocent nature for that matter. Was he out to take me? I'll never know for sure, but I think I made the right choice in running. For a long time I was scared to walk my dog near my home, and I would get a lump in my throat whenever I saw a similar car slow down near my side. I eventually moved on, but I'll never forget that feeling of sheer panic I felt as I rushed down into the park that day. When I was 17, I worked in a large mall at Vans. I had a lot of creepy older guys come in and flirt with me, but one guy took the cake. One day I was working the usual busy as hell Saturday nights, and there were 4 very tall men that asked me for my help getting shoes. I worked at an outlet, so the store was large with tall racks. The mall I worked in was extremely popular amongst locals and tourists alike. The mall has some history for people being taken, and a hotspot for it. So anyway, the men said that they were from Nigeria, and they were pretty chill at first until they began to flirt. One man kept saying he has a son in Nigeria and asked if I wanted to wed him. I laughed because I thought he was joking, but suddenly he looked extremely offended. I was awkward and began talking about shoes, but the man interrupted me by saying how great his son was and that I would make a great wife. At that point I grew uncomfortable because I didn't want to be rude, so I asked for a coworker to come over and take care of them as I went to the bathroom. Everything was normal for the remainder of my shift. I clocked out and was waiting for my dad to come pick me up. I usually walked around the halls of the mall as I waited. The music was soothing and all was calm. I walked past the restroom hall and saw figures standing in my peripheral. I glanced and saw the 4 men from earlier. I was in full-on panic mode at that point, but played it off. I smiled at them softly and kept walking so they didn't think I was being rude. Sure enough, they began following me. I picked up my pace, hoping to find other people walking around, but there weren't any. I was speed walking, but the guys were keeping pace with me. My thoughts were to just go to the bathroom so that I could lose them, so I entered the next restroom hall. I walked slowly thinking I had lost them, but soon after I heard pounding footsteps in a hurry. I looked back and they were coming right after me. I didn't think the bathroom was an option anymore, and I started yelling for help. I ran straight to the employee corridor of the mall. Right when I got there through the doors, a security guard met me on the other side. I bumped into him and never felt more relieved in my whole life. The men took off the other way, and the guard let me stay in his office until my dad came. Thank God for that guard. If he wasn't there, I probably even wouldn't be sharing this with you now. As for those guys, let's not meet. I'm 22 years old, and 5'1", or at least I was when this following event took place. I'm not a very intimidating person. I work as a kindergarten teacher, and I would meet parents and other family members all the time. I've made extremely good relationships with all my students, and good impressions on their caretakers. One day, about a month ago, we got a new transfer student from another school on the other side of town. Right off the bat, I hated his dad. He was creepy, and would always look at me with a certain look. I brushed it off at first, because I've had male caretakers hit on me before, since I was single at the time. The child was weird. He would bully kids in the strangest way. He would tell kids that he wanted to do really horrific things to them, which, in turn, led to a conference with the dad and child after school. And he didn't seem angry or uncomfortable like I would assume most parents to be. He just wore a small smile like he was trying to hide his pride. He never took his eyes off my mouth, and it made me extremely uncomfortable. We terminated the conference and agreed he would not have recess for a week. Months went by. I got a boyfriend, and we were walking in an outdoor shopping mall on a date, when I felt eyes on us, like eyes burning into the back of my head. We walked into a furniture store and my boyfriend looked so uncomfortable. "There's a man that's been following us. Let's go," he whispered to me. I didn't say anything, but he knew I agreed. We left the store, and he wrapped his arm around my hip. "Miss Kay," I heard behind me. I turned around, and it was the child and the dad. "We saw you walking and thought we'd come say hi," he smirks. He looks at my boyfriend and glares at him. He's 6'3" and has the build of a Viking, but is extremely fit, beard and all. He could be considered extremely intimidating, but he's just one big teddy bear. John. "This is John, my husband," I smiled. I lied about it because I knew that if some guys hear the word husband, they back off. The dad seemed very put off by this, like he was going to attack him. We awkwardly spoke for a moment, and then left and drove home. 4 years later, John and I did get married. We moved to a new home, and it had many windows and was gorgeous. We had put metal stoppers on the windows because we didn't trust people, even though it was a fairly nice neighborhood. John and I one day were spring cleaning when we felt like someone was watching us. John was next to me washing the top of the fridge, and I instinctively looked out the window to see a car across the street. I asked John if he knew who it could be, and he said no, and closed the blinds, being a bit creeped out by it. That night we were falling asleep on the couch, and in the living room we had two extremely large windows that faced the backyard. John had already fallen asleep, and I was still watching TV when I heard a weird metallic tapping on the glass. I played it off and used my peripherals to look out the window, and caught a glimpse of a shadow passing by. It was at this point that I awoke John. I told him someone was at the window and thanked God for my great taste in men. He used to be a police officer, and even till now is a firefighter. We keep a crowbar next to the front door and a metal bat behind the couch. He grabs the bat, hands it to me, and he slowly walks around to the dining room, and under the table is a firearm which he keeps for emergencies. I dialed 911 and heard John run out the front door quickly. "I am armed, and have no problem with hurting you," he yells, since it's like 1:15 in the morning and couldn't get the license plate. We filed a report, and the cops who came knew John and said they would have someone patrol the house for a week or so. Fast forward a month-ish later, we were in bed, and I happened to need to pee at 3 in the morning. I came out the bathroom and felt someone grab my face. I had no fighting experience whatsoever, so didn't even know how to defend myself. The bathroom door swings in, and there's a towel bar behind it, so when the door is hit, it's super loud. So I slammed my arm against the door, and John is a very light sleeper, and I was praying he would hear it. I felt really drowsy, and felt the person dragging me, and woke up in the hospital and saw John in the chair next to me. I asked him what happened, and he said he grabbed the metal pipe from under the bed and attacked the man. He shattered his jaw and broke both his knees. When the man was unconscious, John turned on the light to see it was the dad. He called the police, and I'm apparently mildly allergic to chloroform. To this day, we have no idea how he got into the house. The front and back doors have glass, so we lock the glass and the main doors before going to bed. We never open the windows further than the guards, and there are screens on them too. There was no sign of forced entry and no fingerprint anywhere from the guy. Now, I'm putting my doctorate to good use and teaching at the university. They're much more tolerable, and I feel safer since the university is simply a few blocks away from the fire station. To that kid, I hope you grow out of this weird sadistic phase. And to the dad, I hope you rot in jail, and that we never meet again. I'm a female volunteer for the fire department, and this happened a few years back when I was 20. During our drills at my former department, our bay doors are open so people have been known to walk in and talk to us and ask questions or just look at the trucks. One evening, this 23-year-old dude strolls by, a fellow firefighter from another town, which isn't uncommon. Firemen stop by other departments all the time when in town. He made his rounds and was talking to my chief, my captain, and the young guys, and he made his way over to me and started chatting me up. He was a nice guy, good looking, and we exchanged Snapchats. It didn't take us long to figure out that he was a psycho. A week after talking with me, he messages me, "So how come you didn't swipe right?" Confused, I asked him what he meant, and then this unfolded. He told me all of this in an attempt to impress me with how devoted he was. He found me on a dating app, used my profile picture from the dating app to find my Facebook, since in one of my Facebook pictures I'm wearing a uniform that had my last name. Definitely my bad. He then used my profile picture to find out what fire department I was on by looking closely at the fire truck in the background. He told me he walked by my fire department almost every day to see when we drilled and to spot me, and that he's telling me this. I'm confused as heck, and he then goes, "I'm having a pretty rough day. Can I come over?" Cue to him telling me he's on his way. He used my Snapchat location to find my work and house. My location now is off on everything. When he arrived, he brought a love letter and gifts. He said he was sorry and confused and just really wanted things to work out. I told him that he needed to leave and never speak to me again, to which he obliged by leaving, saying if that would make me happy. He then made 3 to 4 new Snapchat and Facebook profiles in an attempt to add me back. At one point he got clever and made his Snapchat username Chris Smith 1990, which made me go, "Hey, it's my friend Chris Smith." Lo and behold, it isn't. Once I realized it wasn't my friend, but instead the psycho, he asked what I could do to make it up. I texted get lost and to set himself on fire, and then I got a video of him walking into the woods, and then he did that. He flicked a lighter over his hand, and I thought, haha, yeah. Then his entire hand and arm lit up, followed by screaming, and it cut out. I started to freak out thinking, oh crap, and immediately got a photo of the hairs on his knuckles and arms burnt off and his burnt shirt. He was okay and was coated in something flammable, but something that wouldn't actually damage him. Creep. blocked him again. He stopped coming over after he presented himself at my house, and he saw that I had a firearm. I didn't know how to use it, and I wasn't planning on using it in fairness, but it sent the point across. When my parents had just had me, they moved into a not-so-great neighborhood that was crime-riddled. One thing I remember from their stories is that when I was about 2, they had a nice neighbor who had just moved in introduce himself. Can't remember the name. Point being, he came off as really nice and friendly. Said that if they ever needed anything, to just let them know. My parents were quite young when they had me, and very poor. And for some reason my dad needed a toaster for part of his thing at work. So he went over shyly and asked if he could borrow the toaster for the afternoon. The guy happily handed it to him, and when he returned it in the evening they got talking and got a little more friendly. My dad says that when he mentioned about his young son, the guy grew ever more interested. Well, one evening my mom is home alone with me, my dad working late, when all of a sudden she gets a knock on the door. It's the guy. He offers his services as a babysitter and says that if she and my dad ever need some alone time or want to go out, that he's had plenty of kids and that he's more than qualified to look after them. My mum, trying to think the best in people, just smiles and thanks for the offer, but that was the end of it, and closes the door and goes in. She got a creepy vibe from him, but couldn't shake the feeling that there was a darker motive for his visit. He was almost too sweet. Later that evening, my dad gets home from work, and she tells him about the experience, explaining how it was a bit out of the blue, if you know what I mean. My mum explains it, saying that it's something you might bring up if the child is present, or if you just happen to be there. It's not something you specifically come round and say. My dad was starting to get creepy vibes as well. So a few weeks later, we've got a similar situation where it's about midday, when my mom is home, but she's feeling a little sick, and she's just sleeping on the sofa with me nestled in her arms. Out of the blue, she hears a tapping noise. She looks over, and as it's fairly open plan, she can see the kitchen window from where she was positioned on the sofa. And the window starts being pushed open. She sees a head pop in, but the head did not see her. She stood motionless as the guy, the neighbor, started slowly pushing himself in through the kitchen window. He had to navigate through cutlery and recently washed dishes, and as he was trying to not make noise and get in through that window, did he spot my mum. They locked eyes for a few seconds, and he quickly rushed out the window, didn't even close the door, and legged it to his own house. My mum instantly shot up, called the police, but apparently nothing could be done because there was no proof he'd done anything. But my dad never spoke to him again. It took them a few weeks before they could find a new house to move into, as like I said, they weren't exactly swimming in cash at the time. But eventually we found a new place. Who knows what that guy wanted to do to me, or my mum. We'll never know. We're just glad we never found out. I'm a 26-year-old female from Michigan, but I was 20 at the time this took place. I live in a safe town and I was working at a Walmart in the next town over, which is an even safer town. I worked midnights because I am definitely not a people person. Every day I would go home on my lunch to see my new puppy, which to this day has kept me going through countless problems in my life. Working midnights, there were basically no cars on the road when I was going home on my lunches. It was when I was about 4 miles from work at a stoplight that I noticed a car had been behind me for a mile or two. I drove like a grandma and always go on the speed limit, so there wasn't a reason for someone to stay behind me with a clear open road overall. I keep on my way home. The car is still behind me for another mile. I thought, okay, that's weird, but maybe a coincidence. I then had to turn on a side street with only neighborhoods along either side for about a mile. You guessed it, the car turned too. I started to get worried, but still brushed it off. Perhaps they lived down that street. It was when I turned into my neighborhood I started to lose it, when the car was still following me. I turned down my street but didn't pull into my driveway because I didn't want to lead this creeper to my house, so I kept driving and took another way back out of my neighborhood. The car persisted. Just to be positive, before I called 911, I drove through my neighborhood the same way as before and he followed again. I got back on the main road from the side street and dialed 911, crying because I was terrified, and explained the situation to them. I headed back towards my work. She asked where I was and told her the crossroads, and lucky me, there was a patrol unit a mile up, and the car was still following me. She stayed on the phone with me and told me to pull up to the 7-Eleven at the crossroads, and the police were close. The car pulls in after me. The dispatch lady told me to turn my hazards on so the police knew which car was which. The car must have seen the police and tried to leave, but not today. They stopped him on his way out turning. I was just parked in a spot crying hysterically. An officer comes over and asks if I know a Michael Stonebreaker. I say no, I don't. The officer continues to say he has a good amount of heroin on him and that this isn't his first arrest, so he'll be going away for a while. Why did he follow me? What was his motive? The officer also said the creeper said he was following me because he thought I was his friend. Well, why didn't he pull up to me at the red light we were stopped at? Why wouldn't he have tried to get my attention somehow? That was a very terrifying experience for me and taught me a valuable lesson. Pay attention to your surroundings day or night. Anything can happen, anywhere, even in a safe town. I was 18 years old and worked in a mall clothing store. I usually worked the night shift, which meant leaving the store between 9 or 9:30. None of us thought anything about calling out good nights or walking out to our cars alone. Usually the parking lot was full of all the other workers leaving at the same time. On this particular night I was in a great mood. I had had a good evening at work and was going to meet up with my boyfriend when I got home, so I was just smiling and thinking to myself as I walked. I got to the curb in front of the mall exit door to check for oncoming cars before I crossed over to where my car was parked. It was not that far away, maybe 10 spaces from the front, when I glanced up to verify where my car was. I caught the eyes of a man sitting in his truck. He was wearing a cowboy hat, pulled down low over his eyes, as though to try and conceal his face, but he was staring intently right at me. I literally froze in place, and I have never felt fear like I did in that moment. I snapped out of my trance, and then I ran as fast as I could past his truck into my car, which was only spaces away. This was before key fobs, so I needed my keys to unlock the door. I always made fun of scary movies when the girl ran and dropped the keys trying to get in, but it really does happen that way. I was shaking so badly I could not get the key in the door, and then I dropped the damn things. I felt like I was in a cheesy movie. Seconds later, I was sitting in the car and shaking so badly, I had to sit there a moment or two before I could drive off. He had not chased me. He did not leave, but continued to sit there. Later in the evening, after I'd finally calmed down, I felt like an idiot thinking I'd gotten scared of someone's husband picking up his wife after work. The next day I returned to work, same night shift, and told everyone at work what happened and how scared I'd been, and made fun of myself for being such a chicken, but made sure that someone walked out with me later that night. I stood at the door of the mall ready to run back in if I saw anything off, but he wasn't there. I exhaled and my friends and I went to our cars, relieved that everything was okay. The following days at work, there was no talk of my fright from 2 nights ago, and it was business as usual. About halfway into my shift, my manager walked up to me and said she needed to talk. She turned around and walked up to a cop that I had not noticed was in the store. Curious, I walk over, and my manager wanted me to tell the cop about what happened. I felt silly telling him some story, because nothing really had happened. When I finished telling him, he started questioning me about the truck. Did I know which model it was exactly? The color? The year? I finally said something about I did not want to get anyone in trouble, that I had just been freaked out a little but it was no big deal. The cop then explained that the night before, one of the ladies leaving for the night had been taken, driven around in the back of the mall into an unlit area, and was beaten, and something terrible had happened to her. I felt myself get lightheaded and my vision went back for a moment, with it drawing on me that I had seen the guy. My description of the truck matched the description of the victims. Her guy was not wearing a cowboy hat, was the only difference in our description. That was the beginning. Our city now had several serial people, and it took them several years to catch them. His wife figured out it was her husband and turned him in. That was a scary time, and women were terrified to be out alone after dark. At our mall, and I imagine others, no one was allowed to leave alone. The mall parking lot was now lit up 360, and they had security on site making sure we were all safe. We all started a call chain between the stores to let everyone know if you saw anyone that made you suspicious or frightened, so that everyone would be aware and on their guard. And I always felt guilty for that woman being attacked. When I was 14, I had an appointment at a bank with my mum. She wanted to set up an account for me. So one afternoon we were downtown in the bank building, and I remember feeling really bored by the whole process. It was that kind of dry financial stuff, and I would rather stay home and play video games or something. My mum noticed after a few minutes, and then confirmed with the bank employee that I was actually just needing to sign the papers in the end, and for everything else I didn't really need to be there. We were already downtown, and my mum gave me a bit of money and told me to buy myself new clothes. I did not care about my appearance at all back then, and always looked kind of slobbish. The whole thing would take about an hour, so it would be fine if I were back by then. I went to the mall first, since I knew there were some cheap stores. While I was browsing some clothes, I noticed an older man around 60. That wasn't anything creepy or remarkable. I just thought he was weird, seeing someone that age in a store that is predominantly for young people. I then noticed that this guy kept appearing at stores I was at in the mall, almost like he was following me. I shrugged it off at first, but then I realized he actually was. I even tried to make a little game out of it, and it soon became clear he would always go into or near the stores which I entered. Now I was a naive boy. Besides from the fact that he was following me, there was nothing weird to this old man at all, so I couldn't even have imagined his actual intentions. I just thought he was some bored geezer who liked to play shop detective in his free time, and maybe he mistakenly thought I had stolen something when I was in the first store. Yep, I was pretty dumb back then. When I left the mall, the guy still followed me through the city. I wasn't scared, just slightly irritated. But I chose to ignore him for the time being and just take care of the shopping. When I entered the next store, he didn't seem to follow me at first, but then while I was choosing some clothes in the upper level, I noticed him again a few shelves away. I went to the changing room to try on some of the stuff I bought, and that's when I heard slow steps approach the booth I was in. I knew it was him, and thought it was kind of creepy, but still didn't fully grasp what was going on. He didn't linger there too long, but he remained at the store, which I left after deciding not to buy anything. At this point I'd had enough. After leaving the building, I immediately hid behind one of the pillars that led to the entrance. I saw him exit the store and look for me, but he didn't notice me and went away. I thought I was rid of him. The problem was the bank building where my mother waited was in the same direction that the stalker just went. I decided it would be safer to wait a bit, so I went into the McDonald's opposite of the clothing store and got myself a burger. And then, while I was eating outside of the McDonald's, the guy actually came back. At this point, I had had enough. It was obvious the guy wasn't any kind of shop detective, so what the hell did he want? I was really annoyed at him for following me and creeping me out, but I also was kind of curious what his deal was. What I did next, please, never do this. I would have never have done it had I known what he wanted. I lured him away. At the end of the street there was this nice breakfast place, which closes in the afternoon. So, at that time there weren't any people near the benches and chairs in the front place. I sat down on one of the benches and nervously played around with my MP3 player. I knew what I was doing was dangerous, but my curiosity got the better of me, and as weird as it may sound, I felt also kind of thrilled. It didn't take long for the stalker to sit down on the bench opposite me. He didn't introduce himself or ask my name. He just started some small talk and told me he's not from here, but I looked like I could show him around. This still felt really weird to me, but I was kind of relieved as he didn't come off as a bad guy, which is dumb on my part. I told him politely I didn't have time, since I had to go back soon to see my mum. He asked if I had enough time to show him just one place, the park. I asked him which park he wanted to go to, but he replied that any park would do. Something really started to feel off here. Lucky there was one nearby that was really easy to find, so I started explaining the directions to him, but he interrupted me, saying he wanted me to take him there personally. I agreed and started to lead the way, but as we were walking, and neither of us said anything, I slowly realized what was happening. I froze in place, and he turned back and looked at me, asking if I did not want to go to the park with him anymore. I panicked and screamed no, which caused a lot of people to turn towards us, as this was happening in a very busy place. He just said, bye, and left, while I immediately ran back to the bank building to tell my mum what happened. She was still speaking with the bank employee from before. My mum got angry and told me if anyone ever tries to do that again, I should kick them down, which is really questionable advice to give a child, but that's kind of how my mum shows support. In any case, strange creepy dude with bad intentions. Let's not meet again. Me and a long-term girlfriend parted ways, pretty much mutually as the relationship had fizzled out and was even becoming toxic in its own way. So I was more than happy to be done with it. In fact, I'd been wanting to break it off for months, but I thought it would devastate her and had too much sympathy for her situation. We both moved on, and a few months down the line I started getting random numbers or private number calls in the middle of the night, where it was just silence or nonsense. Then I got a warning message from the ex saying that her current boyfriend was protective, jealous and fiery, and was convinced she still had feelings for me and vice versa, and or I was continuously trying to mess with her. That's the thing. I literally hadn't spoken to her since the breakup. One day, I decided to call the person that kept blowing me up in the middle of the night, and that was a mistake, as it fueled the dude to go into a rage. It started with long, rambling texts, Facebook messages and voicemails. I'm pretty sure the dude was harmless, but some of the material I have saved was to the level of felony harassment, i.e. death threats. Eventually it died off and I forgot about it. Then one day, X hits me up saying she just wanted to be civil and catch up. I decide to decline as I want to avoid drama, but she insists her boyfriend trusts her now and there'll be no problems. We chat about some mundane stuff for a bit, and that was that. The next day I get a text from her number that is clearly him saying, we knew it all along. And yeah, back to square one. Eventually I changed my number, continually blocked social media accounts until they finally broke up and it was all done. But holy hell, I'd never seen such an irrational human being and feel sorry for whatever poor girl that guy ends up with. My boyfriend and I have been together just a little over 2 years now. I moved in basically right when we got together. It was all great at first. I met all his neighbors, and because of me he even started talking to some of them that he didn't before we got together. The first summer we were together, we decided to get a pool and put it in our backyard. We also started having bonfires since the weather was nice, and we have a decent sized yard. We had the pool up for about a month at this point, and we were having a bonfire with some friends one night and a few drinks. Suddenly the person who lives behind us across the alley walks up and starts talking to us. Note, we have never spoken to this neighbor before. It was all normal small talk, getting to know each other's names, talking about how long we've lived there, how he'd seen us out with our dog and how it's well behaved. Then it turns into talking about our pool. I just wish I could take a dip sometimes, you know. It's so hot and it just looks so fun. I see you both out there all the time. This strange neighbor says it's probably a good time to mention he's in his 50s, and me and my boyfriend are in our early 20s. My boyfriend, being the easygoing guy he is, didn't even notice that the comment was a bit weird and says, "No problem, man, anytime you want, just ask." I begin to look at my phone and say it's getting late, and that we should probably turn in for the night. We say our goodbyes and figured it would all be over, and ended the night normally, but it wasn't the end. My boyfriend and I are on pretty close work schedules, him working Monday to Friday 7 till 5, and me working any day 8 to 5. One day I got off work a little early, came home, and the way our driveway is I can't see completely into our backyard because of part of the house blocks it. I get out my car and go into the house and into the kitchen and grab a drink. Our sink has a little hole window above it which looks out over the backyard with a clear view of the pool. I look out and saw none other than our creepy neighbor just floating in our pool. I freak out and call my boyfriend, who says just to stay in the house and that he'll finish up what he's doing and come home. I do so, and the creepy neighbor is gone by the time my boyfriend arrives. Now my boyfriend is kind of a hothead when it comes to privacy, and me feeling uncomfortable. So even though he was gone, my boyfriend was fuming. He understands that he gave him permission to swim in our pool, but he told him to ask first. So my boyfriend takes the ladder out of the pool and puts it in our mudroom, and locks the door so no one can get it. Later on in the night, luckily my boyfriend was calmed down, and saw the creepy neighbor outside with the dog and spoke to him about swimming in our pool without asking, and the creepy neighbor apologizes, saying it was a mistake and wouldn't happen again. You'd think it was over, but it wasn't. We started seeing him wandering around his backyard a lot more often than we had ever seen him do before, and in this time we had also talked to some other neighbors and learned that he was apparently a child predator. We also learned he worked with our meth head neighbors who do carpentry, and that's another story in itself. To give you some background to the next part of the story, like I mentioned earlier, our kitchen has a window that looks out over the backyard, and right next to our kitchen is our bathroom, which has a huge window that also looks out over our backyard, which happens to be right in front of our mirror and washer and dryer. Also, since my boyfriend had been a bachelor before me, he hadn't taken much time in buying curtains or anything for the house, so the windows were just completely open. Also, so you can get a better picture, I may be in my early 20s, but I look as if I could be 16. We find out through neighbors who were decent friends with the meth heads that apparently the creepy neighbor had been talking about watching me undress and how he even tried to peek in other windows to try and see me in other places of the house. When my boyfriend hears this, he isn't happy. He begins to get even angrier every second, and you can see his face turning red. He, as calmly as possible, asks the nice neighbors that had told us this if they had a spare no trespassing sign they could have, since they just put some up in their yard. They did, and along with the stake to put it in the ground. He charges up to the house, grabs a hammer, and then in the backyard where he begins to scream about creepy neighbor being a pedophile and that he's a peeping Tom. He screams for 10 more minutes, causes a few people surrounding neighbors to come out and look, and all the while I'm sitting in the house feeling completely violated. He finally came in completely calm, hung a blanket on the bathroom window, and calmed me down since I was very freaked out. The next day I looked up his name, and he had actually been to prison for sexually abusing his niece and a few other things. Eventually he moved out and we never heard from him again. In the end, I know it was kind of stupid of me just to undress and be careless right in front of a huge window where anyone could see me. But I also thought I would be fine since I was in my own home. I'm just happy my boyfriend was there to look out for me. And I'm also thankful for my neighbors, who looked out for our house. And they still do, even though he's gone. When I was a sophomore in high school, I lived about a 15-minute walk away from my school. It was on the same street and only past one intersection with residential houses on all sides. I have never walked home before in my entire life, as my parents always insisted on driving me since I live in a crime-ridden city, mostly robbers, gangs, and poverty. My parents divorced around the time I hit 10th grade, and my dad moved out, leaving behind my sisters and mum at our house. My mum rented out the extra room and garage to my cousin and one of her friends and her boyfriend. I remember my mum had asked me to walk home since she was working a double shift at work that day. I didn't have any keys at the time, and she assured me that someone would be home, most likely my cousin, since he was between jobs and was shutting himself in the garage smoking pot all day for weeks now. I said yes and assured her I didn't mind. After school ended, I started my walk home. I was in a big crowd of kids walking home up until the intersection where we all deviated, as I was the only kid walking down my side of the street. As I kept walking, a dark-colored SUV parked about 20 feet from where I was. I didn't think anything of it. Eventually passed the car and kept walking. As I passed the car started slowly driving along the sidewalk, still close to the curb, staying within some yards behind me. I could hear their engines stay the same distance from me. I took out a small compact mirror from my shoulder bag, faking that I was checking my face, then saw the car still driving slowly, occasionally getting in the driving lane to pass up a parked vehicle, and then get close to the sidewalk again. The windows were a bit tinted and I couldn't see their face. I kept my same pace as to not raise any alarms, and as I was getting within view of my house, I saw there were no parked cars in the driveway. My heart instantly dropped because I knew this meant no one was home, and I didn't have any keys to my house since I never walked home. As I walked towards my house, the car parked right in front of my house and didn't move. I checked my backyard fence, and I was relieved to find it unlocked and went through. I booked it to an outside bathroom where I locked myself in. I called my boyfriend to come and get me, and didn't move from that spot until he arrived. All in all, it took my boyfriend about 15 minutes to get there, and he said there was nobody there when he arrived. I was afraid he was going to come back and break into the house or something, but fortunately for me, I never saw him nor his car again. This happened to me when I was around 5. My parents, siblings and I went to the mall for back-to-school shopping. I was with my mum and sister while my dad was shopping with my little brother somewhere around the store. We were by the sunglasses section and for some reason I stopped and got distracted, looking at some really cool polarized glasses. I'm sure a few minutes passed, and next thing I know my mum and sister weren't around. I start to freak out and I'm extremely worried that I won't be able to find them. A little later, a man in his late 30s or early 40s shows up and asks me where my parents are. I tell him I don't know and that I'm lost. He nicely offers to help me look for my mummy and daddy. He grabs me by the hand and we start walking towards the door. I kept on telling him that my mummy and daddy are probably somewhere inside and haven't left yet. The man says we'll go and see if his parents' car is still somewhere in the parking lot. On our way out, my dad sees me holding hands with this complete stranger. My dad calls out my name and runs towards me, and I remember the guy just leaving and not even acknowledging my dad. Who knows what would have happened to me? At the time of this story, I was 17 and was living for a few years in a small house with my mum after my parents' divorce 6 years ago. The house wasn't huge, but we had one floor with our bedrooms and a small garden. We also have a dog who isn't really scary. It's one of those small dogs with a lot of hair. His biggest default is that he barks a lot during the day every time someone is close, near the garden perhaps. That annoyed me and the neighbors a lot. It's important to note that my dogs never bark at night and will always sleep in the bed with me. Anyway, one night, in the middle of the night, I had a dream where I heard a constant dog barking. In my dream, I felt like it lasted 1,000 years, but I think perhaps it only lasted a few seconds really. When I awoke from the nightmare, I didn't feel the weight of my dog on my feet. I felt like something was wrong, and then I realized my dog was actually barking and growling. I didn't understand what was happening. I just looked for my dog and saw him on the top of the stairs, his head turned towards the front door. The door opening on the garage was actually on the side of the front door. I jumped out of my bed and rushed to the top of the stairs where my dog was. There was a shadow of a man standing just near the bottom of the stairs next to the front door. I wasn't even able to shout. I just took my dog in my arms by reflex and ran towards my mother's room. My mother was just waking up. She takes medication for sleeping, so it's hard for her to wake up. Thank goodness the door of her bedroom can be locked with a key. Even though I was shaking like hell, I turned the key in the lock and locked the door. My mum understood what was happening when she heard the footsteps coming from the stairs. We froze in a corner of her bedroom, and she grabbed her cell phone to call police while we were trying to reach the cops. The guy started shaking the door handle and then punching the door. After a moment he stopped, and this psycho laughed. That's when my mum had the idea of shouting, "I called the police, get out." After a moment we heard him going down the stairs still laughing. We didn't dare move until we did hear the police officers. When they arrived, of course, no one was there. In the living room on the table, there was a note where he wrote, "See you soon." They said later that apparently the guy got in and out by way of the garage, which had a back door and was at the time always left open. Immediately after that, we went to live with my grandparents for a while and moved out to a new house some months later. We never heard of the guy again, but we always checked that every door was locked after going to bed, and I've had trouble sleeping ever since. For almost a year after, I would wake up at 4 a.m. just to make sure he hadn't found us and trying to sneak into our home once more. Lock your doors, people. I work night shift at Walmart. My shifts are always from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., except in the first few months of the year when they're cutting back on hours, and I sometimes start at 11 p.m. and leave at 6 a.m. Late last year, around September, when the weather was still nice outside, I went into Walmart during the day to buy some groceries. I had a few things in my basket and was walking out from the back of the store towards the self-checkout area. I noticed, out of my peripherals, that a man, probably in his mid-20s, a little taller than me and wearing a baseball cap, was approaching me from the other side of the features, those promo displays that sit in the middle of the big aisles. When he was done, he started talking to me like we were acquaintances. "I see people I know here all the time when I'm here." "Oh?" I asked. assuming he'd seen me in the morning while I was working. "Yeah, it's weird how every time I come here I see the same people all the time." He kept rephrasing himself, and I didn't really know what to say. It was pretty awkward. He kept making small talk, as I didn't stop walking to the self-checkout, and was kind of just going along with the conversation like you do when some random person is talking about the weather. Now that I look back on it, when he told me he sees the same people all the time, I thought he looked a little familiar and assumed he was a vendor and worked some mornings there, and I mistakenly mentioned I worked there and also see the same faces. Then he told me to have a nice day, and I checked out and went to my car, dismissing the interaction. A lot of fellow employees greet me at Walmart when I go there during the day, so I didn't think much of it. Then, it got super weird super fast. I was just leaving the parking lot, and the exiting road splits into a left-only lane and the other a straightaway. I was turning, stopped, when this white Ford Explorer pulls up next to me and beeps loudly. I was already turning, but looked in my rear view, and sure enough it was the guy from earlier. I recognized his face and baseball cap. He sat at this stop, watching me pull away. Alright, a little weird, but he's probably just being friendly. When I got home, I told my boyfriend, and he immediately thought it was strange, and then said I was wrong for even engaging in conversation with this man, because sometimes some guys can get the wrong idea. My boyfriend also works with me on my shift, but his car has a blown head, so we've just been using my car to commute back and forth from work. So on nights I don't work, my car is still there if he works. Keep in mind that as employees, we aren't allowed to park close to the store. We are limiting the parking at the far end of the lot or in front of the other stores in the shopping center. I have a typical spot. I always park in front of the AT&T place, which is next to the gym, which is next to Walmart. About 2 months ago, my boyfriend said he went to walk out the car on break and saw a white Ford Explorer parked next to it, with a guy sitting within it. When he saw my boyfriend, he left. This happened again in the same month, except my boyfriend was sitting in the car, and the white Ford Explorer drove up to Walmart, then past my boyfriend staring at him. Then last month, I was driving home from work. It was barely 7 a.m, still pretty dark outside, and I was cruising down the highway towards the exit for my town. There was a car following 2 lengths behind me. We were both doing the speed limit, nothing abnormal, and suddenly this car begins to speed up. Gets in the fast lane as if to pass me, but slows down so that we are neck and neck. The driver turns on his interior lights, waves at me, and then speeds off. It was the guy in the white Ford Explorer. I just stared at him bewildered. I didn't know what to think. Then it dawned on me. He knows where I work. He knows what my car looks like. It's pretty distinguishable even from the back. I have sharp things along the top, decals, mud flaps, etc. He probably was waiting for me to leave work and then followed my car when I left. Thank God he didn't follow me home, because I never would have realized it. I was totally unsuspecting when I walked out to my car alone. Now, what happened a few days ago is why I'm even sharing this. I think this is when it started to escalate. It was a typical night. Both my boyfriend and I worked along with our co-workers and friend called Mark. When Mark works, we always park next to him, so we can talk on lunch and breaks with the windows rolled down. Mark parks further away from the store, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. We finish up for the night, clock out, and Mark heads out to his car while my boyfriend and I buy some stuff to make for dinner. We check out and head to the car. Mark is still there, which is unusual for him, since he books it out of there like a bat out of hell every time his shift is up. "Hey man, did you get my text?" he calls out, smoking a cigarette. "No, let me check my phone." My boyfriend pulls out his phone and I see a pretty long unread text from Mark. Pretty much, this weird guy came out of nowhere and was touching and looking at the inside of your girlfriend's car, Mark says. My immediate thought was, some randomer likes my car enough to come up and touch it. Weird, but okay. like he just walked up and started touching the fins and looking inside. Then when he saw me sitting there, he asked me about the decorations. I told him I didn't know anything about them, and he told me to have a nice day. We immediately started checking for damages, slashed tires, etc., but there was nothing. We get in the car, and the three of us just sit there, contemplating the reasoning behind this. The Ford Explorer guy had almost slipped my mind. His encounters were a month or so apart, but then I started thinking about him again. There were two cars parked near us. A white 2010 Pontiac G6, and surely enough, a white Ford Explorer. Up until this point, I didn't know the make of the car he drove, but I knew it was definitely a white SUV. Mark said he came from the direction of those two cars, so unless he walked to Walmart at 7 a.m., one of those cars was his. The Explorer was facing the opposite direction, and I quickly wrote down the number plate. I started asking Mark what the guy looked like. About your boyfriend type, kind of a gangster-looking guy. Keep in mind I've only seen this guy once when he wasn't in this car, which was 4 months prior. I had sounded right, but I didn't really know. We decided to sit there and wait until this guy came out and confront him. Just as we were about to give up and leave, the guy starts walking our way out of Walmart. He was wearing a black hoodie, dark jeans, and a camo bandana. When he saw us, he put on sunglasses. Both of us looked towards Mark. Is that the guy? No, that's not him. Mark shook his head. The guy walks into the Explorer, sits in the driver's seat and lights a cigarette with the door open. After he closed it, I looked back at Mark. Are you sure that's not him? Yeah, it's him. That's the guy, Mark nodded. Explorer guy starts his car and looped around our car, staring at us, then looped again to the exit of the parking lot. Mark said he didn't want to tell us it was the guy because he didn't want my boyfriend to lose his job. I'm pretty sure Mark would have told us. If it was the guy, then some stuff would have gone down. I'm pretty positive now that this guy has been stalking me. For how long, I don't know. I'm starting to think the guy drove to Walmart. I want to assume to buy something, since he walked out with nothing. Saw my car, parked next to it, then realized while he was casing my car that Mark was sitting there. So he asks Mark about the shark fins to try and make him think he was just interested in how it looked, and not being completely shady. I'm creeped the hell out, but I have his plate number. The morning before we left work, my boyfriend bought me pepper spray, and I'm now parking elsewhere, and I'm going to start asking co-workers if they'll take me to my car in the mornings when I'm alone. I don't know what I can do, or if anyone would take this seriously, because he hasn't tried anything yet. Sadly, I'm a pretty dainty girl, too brave for my own good, and I couldn't fight my way out of a wet paper bag. But I don't think this is over yet. Last night I was stocking yogurt alone at around midnight, when I hear, "Excuse me," from behind me. Thinking it was a typical customer question, I turn around while politely replying, "Yes?" When I fully turned, it took me a moment to realize who was approaching me. Stalker. I know that my facial expression probably spoke volumes about my fear for a little while, but I didn't want to alarm or upset him, so I kept calm and spoke to him like I would any other customer. "I'm not a stalker or anything," he prefaced, "but I was just wondering where you got those decorations for your car. I see it a lot and I'm curious." "I got them off eBay." Before I could finish, he interrupted me, trying to keep the conversation going. "Do you know what they're called?" "Pretty sure they're called diffusers, because they're meant to diffuse airflow on the car. I got them off eBay for $20 the whole set." "Oh, okay, thanks. Have a nice night." He smiled and walked away. What the hell? I'm not a stalker or anything. Yeah, dude, you are. I think I was in shock because there was no way I should have been that calm and nonchalant while talking to him. I know for a fact he was just trying to cover his ass since we pretty much caught him red-handed that day. I really hope I never see him again, because he knows we're on to him. This happened to me in 2007. when I was 12 years old, coming back from my elementary school. I took a bus ride which usually lasted around 40 minutes, and I decided to grab some pizza on my way home. There was this small shop right on the bus stop that I visited from time to time. To give you a bit of background, this was a two-way bus stop and pizza shop, and it was across the 4-lane road. So I had to leave the bus and walk in an underground passage to get the pizza and then come back. I walked through the underground passage, nothing creepy or unusual, just the basic communist look that I am used to, with the decent sprinkle of graffiti all over the place. I go to the pizza shop, order, and turn around to go to the underground again. At that very moment, one middle-aged looking guy approached me and started to talk to me in a weird way. He asked if I enjoyed this pizza, if I go here often and what's my name. After a few questions, I noticed he had this extremely huge scar from ear to neck, and part of his ear wasn't there, like literally missing the entire upper part. I started to get a really scared and weirded out feeling when we went to the underground passage. And that's the moment I told him I didn't want to speak with him anymore. He followed me for a few steps, grabbed me, and pushed me to the wall. Before I could say anything, he had his pocket knife right next to my stomach. I felt like the world has stopped. My mouth was dry, and my heart was beating at an extreme pace. And the only thing I could think of is how the hell am I going to get out of this situation without being hurt? I told him to leave me alone, and he started to ask for money. I didn't think for a moment and told him I have some crowns in my pocket. He took 150 crowns, and this was before we had the euro, so it's about €5. And he also took my silver chain. He then put his weapon back in his pocket and casually walked away like nothing had happened. I had mixed feelings about this. Obviously I was really scared, but more importantly, I was so pissed off at people who literally walked next to us while he was pushing me to the wall and holding his weapon in his hand. They did nothing. They didn't even look our way. I felt so betrayed and alone. It was obvious we weren't friends or anything, but even so. Since that moment, I promised to myself I would do whatever I could to help others if they were in situations like this. And if I couldn't, I would at least call the police and stay in relatively close distance to assist in any way I can. Don't be bystanders, people. 2008, Francis Scott Key Moore. I'll never forget the day my instincts saved my friend. I had gone to the mall with my childhood friend Sarah. We had actually been catching up. I never had many friends in school, and in high school me and her never had the same classes, and life outside of school for me was mostly sleep. So this was as good a time as any for us to catch up. Sarah was petite, small and skinny, but I'd never call her frail. I was a tall, heavy-set dude with a bad limp. She would often joke that she felt safer with me because I looked like a big scary bear, and the limp made me look like a badass who always won. She knew I hated being seen as scary, but would often tease, and this small walk would be no different. About 2 hours of walking around, we had been leaving Hot Topic when I felt like I was being watched. And we were being watched. I finally caught the eye of some guy in sunglasses, a tan shirt, grey jacket, and black dress shoes looking at us from across the center of the mall. The most offsetting thing was him. He was clean cut, clean shave, short black hair. Everything about him screamed official, but his clothes looked like he had grabbed them off the floor and tossed them on. At first I thought he was a cop in regular attire, and that I had once again been falsely accused of stealing. Little background. The owner of the mall's Walden Books had taken a strong disliking to me after I accidentally busted their theft sensor 2 years prior by falling over onto one while being stupidly distracted talking to someone else. But he never said anything, nor got close to us to try and stop us. I decided I wanted to see what he was really up to, and that led us into Sears. Sure enough, he followed. I didn't tell Sarah about him, but made a decision. There was a hall to our left for restrooms down by the service bays and waiting rooms, and a good 12 or so feet ahead was electronics. I asked Sarah to wait for me by electronics while I went to the bathroom. There. Now I'd know for sure, as he had to pass this hall, and that would mean I'd have to turn around and walk towards him a bit down the hall. His pace slowed a bit when he saw us splitting up. I glared him down as I came his way, and he then turned down the hall pretending to look at phones, using it as a mirror. He clearly looked at me as his head turned, but he continued straight past the hall. I turned into the bathroom doorway, and as soon as he was beyond view of the hall, I turned around. My turn, I muttered to myself and laughed a bit. I felt like a kid playing spy. I had guessed this guy might notice me, so I came out of the hall and made my way towards tools. This tools section wasn't separated by any walls, but just by the walkway giving me a clear view and cover behind toolboxes and shelves. He was following Sarah now, but still keeping a good distance. What annoyed me about this was that Sarah never got that feeling of being watched and looked over like I had. In fact, both times she looked at him had been only as turning to look around the store. Now I needed to know, but I wasn't going to cause a scene, or so I thought. I walked over from tools. Sarah saw me coming and joined me. We went back into the mall and then headed for a mall exit. Sarah had started to ask me why we weren't heading towards our cars, but a simple hand motion from me cut the question out. We walked out, and he was a considerable bit behind us, so I rushed through the 2 sets of doors, giving them time to close. We walked to the edge of the overhang and stopped. I explained everything while pretending to look for our cars and then turned around. In the area between the doors, there he stood, and now he had no way to go without avoiding both of us seeing him directly. He walked back in, and he had turned, standing against the side wall. I now stood in front of him. "What's up, Chief?" I asked, mocking a cop. Not a smart idea, but if he was a cop or even more security, then he'd have to call me out. He wouldn't look directly at us either. "Gonna say I stole something? I've been minding my own business. How about you mind yours?" I was now projecting at him, but he said nothing, and even having raised my arms at him, he didn't move and didn't dare look at either of us. I opened the next door and waved Sarah through, stopping the door almost touching his face. Sarah had hurried on ahead. I stepped through and the next few seconds remained frozen in my mind. He sighed almost as if relieved that I hadn't hit him with the door. I walked in and took a slow pace, and sure enough he followed. However, he hadn't noticed that I was now walking backwards. I backed right into him and my upper arm caught the feeling of a holster under his arm as we bumped into each other. In MD at the time, conceal carried by civilians wasn't legal, so I knew something was entirely out of place. I was pissed off, but also yelled, luckily as more security was around the corner. "Gun, he's got a gun!" I yelled. He backed away from me as more security came running up with a taser drawn. "She's lucky you're so annoying," he muttered as he continued towards the exit, and more security followed. I didn't stick around to find anything out. I ran for Sarah, grabbed her wrist, and took her through the mall towards the security office. The head of security in the office was not exactly thrilled to see me, but was aware of what had gone on. Apparently they had been watching since we entered Sears, and the tape showed them that the man had been following Sarah since she parked and had actually only started trying to hide himself when she met up with me. The most unreal part of all of this, though, they caught him but released him when he produced an official government ID and number 2. As you can imagine, we weren't best pleased. Why the hell was he following her? This kind of behavior is sick and unacceptable. I'm in my 40s, and thought today about an incident that occurred to me in the mid-90s. 1997 to be exact. The pre-millennium days. In 1997, I was in the Army National Guard, enrolled in college, and also working a part-time job. I was also a single mother with a 4-year-old. I was struggling quite a bit, but always smiling and friendly. No one was a stranger. I was raised in a rural area, so that's just how most people were. I moved to a new apartment in the city about 5 miles from my father's home, so I felt quite safe. I had lived in my apartment about 3 weeks, when one morning, while getting ready to leave for class, I heard a loud knock on the door. I opened it without questioning who it was, and there was this massive guy that had to be at least 6'4" or more, and over 250 pounds. This guy was normal looking, very fit with a maintenance belt on. He tells me he was the maintenance guy, and needed to look at my power box located in my room. I didn't know how he knew where to go, but I let him in, and it was at that point that a sense of terror washed over me, like a flood. I realized I had made a mistake. I was alone with this guy who went right back to my room. I remember wanting to sit and eat, but the terror felt so strong. I grabbed my backpack and rushed out to class. I was afraid to come home, but I didn't tell my dad. I didn't know what I was thinking. I came home alone late at night and looked under the beds and in my couch, and was relieved to find I was alone. I found a massive hole in my closet ceiling, large enough for a man to get through. A few days passed and I had convinced myself that maybe he was the maintenance man, and maybe I was paranoid for no reason. I went to the apartment manager and asked her when the maintenance man would be up to repair the hole in my ceiling. She grew pale and asked me to describe the man. She then informed me he wasn't the maintenance guy. The actual maintenance guy was an elderly gentleman who lived in the apartment below me. The hole was patched up, and I never, fortunately, saw the stranger again. The guy looked so normal, muscular, tall, and not bad looking, but obviously a person with ill intent. I looked up crimes where a man comes in posing it as a maintenance man in the 90s, and there was a guy active from 85 to 98 in my state posing as a maintenance guy. He was caught and sent to prison, but I can't recall his name. Dude, I hope you're still locked up. This happened to my friend Simone a while back. She got into a relationship with a guy who she adored. He constantly doted on her. He had money and came from a line of it, but that didn't make their relationship any more stable. After the honeymoon period of about 3 months, things start to go off the rails. She couldn't come hang out with the girls anymore. There was always an excuse. She was always busy. We would often go to the movies together, just us two, but even these would be cancelled, and I was her best friend. She started telling me that she didn't want to speak to me that much anymore, that her boyfriend was consuming a lot of her time. Non-stop texts, asking where she was when she was at school. It became really infuriating. She even had to quit her job as a nanny of these 2 adorable children because the guy became concerned that she may just fall in love and sleep with the husband. Really messed up stuff. After a while, I actually went round her house and spoke to her mum about it. I felt like it was the best thing to do. She wasn't in a good place. And after a good chat and staying over for dinner, crying and falling asleep together on her bed, we agree that the best course of action would be to tear off the band-aid and let this guy go. It took her about a month, but she dumped him. She finally saw how manipulative he was being and how it's not normal to try and control your partner's life. But then the stalking began. He started sending her gifts, all of which she refused. Then, following her, she got a new job working at a supermarket. She'd be followed home in her car by her ex. When she got home, he'd usually just drive on, and she began to get really annoyed. She had ceased contact with him about 3 months ago at this point. and she started messaging him again, demanding why he was still following her, that they were broken up, and that he should just get over it. He said that he still loved her, and that he would not relent until they were together again. He didn't stop saying this, and said that he needed to make sure she got home safely. It was his number one concern because he loved her, that she was his soulmate. As you can imagine, this went down really well. So well, in fact, she ended up getting a restraining order, which didn't do much until they tried to get further police involvement. At which point, he finally got the memo that perhaps it's best to let sleeping dogs lie. And that's how the story ended. But it was a very challenging year. Thankfully, Simone is now with a lovely guy. This happened when I was a sophomore in high school. I used to take a private bus to school and back. However, when it came to dropping me off home, I was always the last one because I lived a little bit outside of my school district. My bus driver couldn't drop me off after dropping everyone in my school off because she had to pick up the elementary school kids. As a high schooler, we left school much earlier, so I either had to wait for her to drop every elementary school kid off, or I could just walk home from the elementary school. That school was fairly close to my house, perhaps a 10-minute walk. I would walk home every day from that stop. On one particular day, I got off the bus that would park behind the school's field in the back and started walking towards this adjacent parking lot. The school is located in front of a very busy street that was connected to the highway, and in front of the school there was a mall. I always wore headphones to avoid the noise of the busy street while I was walking home. When I got to the other parking lot, a small white car had pulled up and the guy inside started calling out to me. I usually ignore everyone that tries to talk to me when I'm walking home, but I accidentally made eye contact, so I decided to see what he wanted. I didn't notice it then, but looking back, the man was acting very strange. He was sort of jumpy and sweaty. His car was old and was a mess inside. In his passenger seat was a woman who looked angry or annoyed. I assumed they were just hot, as it was nearly 90 degrees outside. He was asking me if I knew where the mall was. Now, the mall is across the street, but there were a few shops independent of it that you had to go around, but it is still visible through the naked eye. I told him yes, to just go straight from behind the school, make a right, cross the busy street, and then make a right at the mall. He was acting like he didn't understand what I was saying and asked if I spoke Spanish. So I explained in Spanish, but again pretended he didn't understand and asked if I could get inside his car and take him to the mall, and then he would drop me off home. In my stupid mind at the time, all I thought was this guy is really annoying because you can literally see the mall from here. I was also thinking that maybe I should just take the ride home since I really didn't want to walk in the heat. However, something inside me was telling me not to get into this man's car. He kept trying to convince me, and the more he spoke, the more nervous he got. Behind me there was another car stationed next to a tree. Sometimes parents would wait for their kids a few minutes before school was over. There was a woman in the car with her window down, just glaring at the guy. The guy kept looking behind me at her. After rejecting him politely for the millionth time, he finally said okay, thank you, and sped off. I thought that was weird, but perhaps he wasn't from around here, which is why the streets were confusing for him. The lady behind me said, "Be careful who you speak to." I looked and awkwardly smiled and said, "Yeah, thanks." On my way home, all I felt was annoyance. The guy really annoyed me for interrupting me while I was walking home, and the lady for talking to me as if I didn't know about stranger danger. Years later, after listening to other people's Let's Not Meet stories, I realized that the man was trying to take me. He was trying to get me inside his car, and the lady behind me staring at him was making him very nervous. The passenger woman was probably there to get Kid's confidence, but she was probably annoyed she had to be there in the first place. Perhaps she didn't want to do this. It honestly gives me chills to think they went to a school to try and pick up children. I wonder who else they tried speaking to. There are parents and security around, which is why I didn't see him as a threat at first. But if it weren't for my gut feeling, I could have easily gotten into his car and never been seen or heard from again. Also, that lady's presence really scared him off. So thank you, lady. And creepy sweaty guy trying to pick up kids. Let's not meet again. I should probably preface this story by letting you know that I have a bit of a problem with being overly polite and setting boundaries. Because of this problem, I have many stories to share, but this is one of them. When I was 20, I was living with my then boyfriend in a not so nice part of town. We decided to walk up the local mall, which had withstood the test of time, to check out some books at Barnes & Noble's. I was super hungover and had basically rolled out of bed to go be with my boyfriend. After we looked around for a bit, I told my boyfriend I was going out to smoke and to meet me outside. While I was outside, I stood next to an old Lincoln Town car, cigarette in mouth, and I began rifling through my purse for a lighter. Just then, an older man stepped out the car, lighter in hand, and lit the cigarette for me. He asked me for my name and told me he was Fish. I told him my name, thanked him for the light, and began to back away. This guy was sketchier looking than my own unkept self that morning. Wait, he said, as he lightly touched his hand to the small of my back, directing me back to him. Can I ask you a few questions? Sure, but I really should get back to my boyfriend. Oh, you have a boyfriend. That means you must like to make friends. Do you like to make friends? He asked. At this point, he had directed me into a position where my back was at an outside corner of the wall, and I would have to push past him to walk away. Yeah, I guess, I said. What if I told you you could make money by just making friends? He asked. I told him that I already had a job and that I needed to get back to my boyfriend. I moved to walk past him, but he held his hands up and positioned himself to keep me in place. I have a friend that would really like to meet you. He's my boss, and he can help you make money. Why don't you just call your boyfriend and tell him to meet you later? You can come with me right now and meet my boss. At this point, my face must have showed some sort of panic because a young man approached us and asked me if I was okay. At first, the man who cornered me bristled and told the other man that we were in the middle of a business transaction. Thankfully for my weak ass, the new stranger stood his ground. The man then took a notepad out of his pocket, scribbled down a number, and thrust it at me before getting back into the car. I thanked the kind stranger and went back inside to meet my boyfriend and tell him about what happened. We ended up putting the phone number up on our fridge as a joke, but there has always been something that's bothered me about the situation. The man in the Lincoln had gotten out and back in on the passenger side. So who was in the driver's seat? I've always been borderline obsessive about locking my doors. I did it as a kid, and as a teenager I learned through experience that a locked door is at least a deterrent and could give someone warning that a person wants to illegally enter their space. It's something I'm known for. Even at social gatherings, I'll lock doors behind me when I come in without even thinking about it. I've heard the line, "Well, who the hell locked it?" followed by that flush of embarrassment because of course it was me, and now I have to say it. For over a decade I've done nightly checks because I can't sleep without doing so. Knowing this is a preface for my story and highlights how strange the situation is. I only just moved here recently, 5 months ago in fact, from a way more heavily populated place in my state. The house where we reside is set far back from any pavement road, separated by 2 dirt roads and 2 private driveways, as my rental is on another person's property, So you go down their private drive and off to the side is my private drive. And I've never even seen a pedestrian back there. Nice and very private. No one can even come here without explicit instructions, and often I still have to meet them down the road, as GPS places my house a few fields to the south of where it really is. This is paradise for people like me, who value their privacy, and don't like having visitors without prior notice. The house is semi-surrounded by trees and brush, with a field on the other two sides. It took a bit of getting used to, the rurality of it, hearing coyotes often, sometimes cows screaming in the night, and the darkness of having no nearby source of light pollution, as the nearest town is 20 miles away. Another relevant tidbit: I don't sleep in a completely dark house. I always leave lights on in a common area, usually only one, but a light nevertheless. The back door leads off into the trees, but it didn't feel so creepy, as a few yards in, there's a 6-foot-tall wire fence laden with vines and offering a further modicum of privacy. No one uses the back door. There's really no reason to. A month in and I found myself locked out, and unfortunately I often lock the door handle on my way out of reflex. As my conscious mind is where the part I know if I have keys out or not, but my subconscious takes over when I'm distracted. I knew I had only locked the handle on the back door and figured I could just pop it to get in myself. I checked the door out and it was pristine, none of those minute scratches that are present when you take a flat metal object and pop the lock on a cheap door. I didn't want to damage it, so I swallowed my embarrassment and called the landlord, admitting that I had locked myself out and needed back in. He came and let me in, and I worked on being more mindful. A little more than a week later, I wake up thirsty. I walk groggily to the kitchen, and as soon as I open my bedroom door, I realize it's way darker than it should be. My ever-burning light is out. I wonder briefly if there's a power outage, but I can hear my fan behind me in the room. So, it can't be that. I take another step, and the hair stands up on the back of my neck. That feeling that someone's watching. Another step, and it's beyond feeling. It's conviction. I turn my head to the left, where instincts say the person is standing, and for a split second I'm relieved. No one's there. In the next instant, though, that relief abandons me, and I notice I can see stars where only darkness should be. My back door is wide open. I take 2 very fast steps backwards out of view of anything that could be in my backyard, knowing I'm responsible for more people's safety than just my own. I don't retreat for long, almost immediately stepping back further and forwards. I have to shut the door, of course. The entire path there, I just know someone's out there, in the dark, waiting until I'm close enough to snatch. I reach out into the pitch darkness for the knob, expecting to feel a hand close over mine at any second. After a moment of panic and driven fumbling, my hand makes contact with the knob and I slam it shut. I go to turn the lock and find it still engaged. Maybe, just maybe this once, the door wasn't completely shut. Like maybe the latch hadn't fully engaged. The turned off light remained a mystery. Both of my boys said it wasn't them, and that's very believable because they've never done it before. Both of them like having the light on to find the bathroom and such, so I write it off as strange, but nothing else was amiss. It was just one of those things that never had a full explanation. From that point on, I put my weight onto the door any time I check or lock it, on my rare and occasional trips to the backyard. Life goes on, and I almost put it to the back of my mind. Almost. Until 3 weeks later. I wake from a nightmare. For the last 10 years, I haven't had a dream I can remember, but I do occasionally have nightmare clusters. Mouth dry, bladder throbbing. It was one of those bad ones where you wake up after making inarticulate sounds trying to scream from a sleep-paralyzed mouth. Deja vu. After my bathroom trip, I emerge into a dark kitchen, 2 steps in, there's someone watching. The door is wide open, a panicked quick retreat followed by a fear-fueled moment of bravery where I rush forward and close the door. Sure at every moment that I'm about to be torn out into the night and slaughtered. Strange. I know for sure the door didn't pop on in its own time. What's going on? My adrenaline finally crashes as I lay in bed after trying to figure this out. I've left my bedroom door open this time so I can hear any goings-on in the house, and I finally fall back asleep with 2 hours to spare before I have to get up. When I do, I wake my boys and I'm halfway to the coffee maker before I see it. The facing door is open again. This time no real feeling of being observed, lights still on in the kitchen. I do what I already should have done and check the door for a sign of tampering. There's new scratches and bend marks where the aluminium gave way to being pried. At least this means it's not a ghost. I don't really know what to do. Life goes on. 2 weeks after that, the chickens penned 30 feet or so from my bedroom window, crow long into the night. Even the hens are part of the show this time, with the hens making eerie little screams. It makes my sleep fitful, not very restful, and I wake up at 2 a.m. when my fan goes off. The power's out. Damn. I get up to use the latrine and to light a few kitchen candles to save on anyone needing to get up in the middle of the night while traversing the house in the dark. 2 steps in. Cue the hair on the back of my neck, and this time I can hear the crickets before I even turn my head. The door is of course open. After I survive another door shutting, I spend a lot of the time thinking about this. There was more damage, scratches and gauges in the jam this morning. I try to rationalize how this can possibly be happening and can't think of anything that could possibly account for it. Any innocent reason I can attribute to it goes out the window when I remember this has never happened even once in the daytime. I think maybe I missed the scratches, that they were already there and that my paranoid brain told me they were worse, which could be feasible, all except for the day I got locked out and remember it was in such good condition that I didn't even have the heart to pop the door myself. I decide to change the deadbolts around. The front door has a square cord lock, and the back has a sloping one that I'm honestly sure is actually backwards in the door. Work picks up, life moves on. That night I'm exhausted. I can't find my Phillips head, so in the place of the locks I put an errant Christmas decoration adorned with bells to place on the door handle and go to sleep. It's never happened 2 nights in a row anyway. I even considered setting up a camera, but thought of the little fact in my musing. Plus, I'm honestly scared to see what I would catch. For once, I'm early in bed. And as soon as my head hits the pillow, I'm asleep. Cue the nightmares. I wake up for the first time at midnight on the dot. Dark kitchen, back door open, scary as hell, and fall back asleep. Wake up at 1:30, door open. Wake up at 3, and to my enormous relief, the door is closed and I fall back asleep, right into a nightmare. In this one I can hear Christmas bells. I come upon a little girl with her back turned to me, and in that weird nightmare logic, at first I'm not afraid of her and ask her what her name is, and she responds that someone's coming. She starts to get louder, and after a few more crescending repetitions, all the while Christmas bells going on in the background, she turns to me, jaw on her chest, mouth unnaturally wide, and screams that someone's here. I wake. It's 5, and a false dawn shines faintly through my window. I immediately get up. Of course the kitchen is dark and the door is open, but surprisingly, no feeling of being watched. I feel like the danger has passed, like gunsmoke in the air after the main event. I close the door, and to my absolute horror, find the Christmas bells laid neatly on the dryer, no longer attached to the door. I spoke to my boys that morning and asked them if they'd heard anything that night. My 13-year-old says nothing, except that he got up at 2:30 to pee and the back door was open, so he closed it. I asked him about the bells and he says he's pretty sure they were on the handle. I switched the locks. A few days ago there was more damage to the door, but so far, it's holding. This culminated in me getting cameras. I set them up, and there were more scratches on the door, like someone tried to pry the lock. But the camera picked up nothing, and doesn't have audio. 2 weeks after that, I left my bag in the car with my allergy meds and nasal spray, and woke up in the night because I couldn't breathe through my nose and I was getting a cold. I went out to get my medication, went into the carport and heard something. It sounded like a heavy bipedal animal in the brush. I was scared. It was strange. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" I say, but there was just silence. I yelled again to no reply. For a solid minute I look, trying to will my eyes to see whatever's the cause of the noise, but see nothing, and turn to walk up the stairs when I'm confident I heard whatever or whoever it was bolt in the other direction. I'm quite positive it was a person. When I wake up, I check my driveway for dirt and there were footprints. But there were others among them from the crew who happened to work there the day before. This is getting very strange. Once I got to where the driveway met the dirt road, there was no way to trace where they had gone. And of course by then the prints had been obliterated by the tire tracks of early risers. As far as evidence goes, there wasn't much. I mean, it could have been there from the day before. After a month of peace, I was feeling pretty good. I didn't know why I had stopped all of a sudden, even if whoever was at the trees that night was the perpetrator. I doubt I scared them off. I was talking with my landlord one afternoon, as he lives nearby, and I see him often walk over. He's been pretty busy lately, not only with other social groups, but he's also been doing a lot of traveling. Our conversation meandered to the topic of the neighbors to my left. He was a strange one, but up until this point he seemed quite harmless. He spent most of his time in his house, and I thought at this point perhaps he had slight agoraphobia, as he rarely went anywhere and seemed to have most of his things delivered. I didn't know the guy well, but he wasn't super friendly. I would sometimes see him out in his robe and boxers on his porch or in his yard, and I would wave and he would never wave back, with the exception of once. My landlord told me in this conversation that he was quite sure this guy had a very outdated opinion on women. I had mentioned he never waved, and that's what he responded with. The reason he guessed he didn't. Here's the interesting point though. He said something to the effect of, "I don't think you'll have to worry about that anymore," as in his antisocial attitude. So of course I asked him why. He was of the opinion that his house was about to be foreclosed, and that he had made a run for it. Basically that he went to live with family or hooked a rental before the police showed up to formally evict. He wasn't sure though, it was just a hypothesis. I thought maybe he was on disability or something prior to this, as he never seemed to go to work, but he clearly had some way to pay his bills, or so I thought. I began to pay more attention, and I think my landlord's right. The sheriff's office showed up with papers one day, but as far as I've seen, no one came to the door. His yard isn't overgrown, but it's mostly shade covered with leaves. Besides, no one has to really cut their grass due to the weather. His house just feels empty. There's also a tent that's been set up in his backyard for 2 months. Some people don't take very good care of their things, but up until a few months ago, I wouldn't have thought that this was his character, as he did take care of his yard pretty well and kept all his tools properly housed. A good indicator would have been a vehicle, of course, but I've never seen one there to begin with. My leading hypothesis in my mind is that it's him. I can't speak for motive though. Maybe he was working himself up to do something worse. Perhaps he had some type of mental issue and the whole thing was some part of his plan I'll never understand. What I do know is that ever since that time, where I guess he took off, I have had 0 issues. I haven't come home to an empty house with the feeling that someone's just left. I haven't had very small things be misplaced. When I sworn up and down, it was no longer where I put it. No waking up in the night, swearing someone was staring at me only to look at my bedroom door and see pitch black house with a back door open. I didn't have any idea if he was gone, but there was a noticeable change in the atmosphere. It was subtle, but it was better. All I know is that I went from desperately wanting to move to getting pretty comfortable in my home again. I do like to think the most of people, but anyway, I'm pretty sure it's him. The only one thing that I will say is that I mentioned before there's a camera that sees part of my property that doesn't belong to me, and coincidentally the problems were occurring in the side of the yard the camera couldn't see, while a simple recon would show the camera for what it was quickly, as there was a red light on it, very visible at night. To an outsider, they'd immediately see the camera, and anyone breaking the law would be wary. A neighbor would know even better which the weak spots were, which is anything beyond the house's front. I met Carter at a convention. Right off the bat, he scared me. I heard rumors that he'd nearly been removed from the extremely liberal convention, but he seemed nice enough and lonely, so I decided to befriend him instead. Then I noticed that he was always nearby. When I was walking to my hotel, he was there. When I was eating lunch, he was there. When I was in my private group, he waited outside the door. When I went to meetings, he was there too, and sat beside me. He usually either walked up to me and started a conversation, which ended in an awkward silence, or just stared at me from 50 yards away. I couldn't believe he was really following me. So I went to my hotel, disguised myself, and went outside to see if he was there. He was, literally lurking in the trees nearby. He pressured me into giving him my number, so I gave him a fake one. He found my professional information and begged me to look over his work, to which I declined. He asked me if I'd be at a party. I lied and said no. He showed up anyway. Somehow he knew I'd decided to go. He always talked about how lonely and depressed he was, and how I was a lifeline, until, on my way home from the convention, I had no service during the flight. He freaked out and spammed 49 messages until ending with, "Okay, fine, I'm gonna end myself now, just so you know," strongly implying that it was my fault for not answering him immediately. I told him to call 911 and then blocked him. He contacted me through Instagram, Hangouts, email and more, but I never replied. I asked the convention security to speak with him about his creepy behavior, and I was told to just switch off my phone. Fast forward a few months, I get an email from James asking me to look over his work. Not a big deal. I run a program specifically for this sort of thing. I agreed, since his email was very polite and well worded, but he seemed pushy in a way I couldn't quite figure out. I ignored it, reviewed his work, and ceased communication. You know where this is going. A little while later he confessed that it was Carter all along. He put all the blame on me and apologized in a horribly manipulative way, begging me once again to review his work. I never replied, and here we are. James/Carter, let's never meet again. This story took place at the end of January 2020. For reference, I'm a 19-year-old female, and I'm about 5'5". This takes place in Canada, and where I live in Canada we tend to have a pretty cold winter. It stays until the end of March, but this year it seemed as if Mother Nature had no interest in sticking around, which meant I could walk with my winter jacket open at night. Anyway, I'm a uni student, and my uni is all the way across the city from where I live. On the bus, it takes me about an hour and a half to get home, the latest being 2 hours away, and that only happens during snowstorms. This semester I was taking a night class that would usually end at 9 p.m. On this particular night though, we did an extra half hour because we had an in-class test at the end of the week. This extra half hour was optional, but since I needed help, I decided to stay. My staying resulted in me missing the safe bus, which was essentially the bus whose last stop was the local mall, which is where my mom would pick me up. If I wanted to take this safe bus, I would have to wait an hour for the next one, or wait 5 minutes and catch the bus that would take me straight to my house. I was exhausted, because I had been on campus since 8 a.m., and it was just an overall chilly day, so I decided to just catch the bus that was coming in 5 minutes. I should tell you that I don't live in the safest neighborhood. It's not the most dangerous one in my city, but I'd say it's in the top 5 of the most dangerous neighborhoods out here. So whatever, the bus ride is fine. I saw the local crackheads, which was nothing new to me, and after about an hour and a half I get off my bus stop, which is along this busy-ish road, and start walking home. About 2 streets from where I have to turn to get on my street, I see these drunk men standing outside of the bar that's located on the corner of my street. Now these men don't usually touch me or anything, but they're very vocal about things. They tend to catcall and just harass women. But I'm used to it, so whatever, screw them. However, I was not in the mood for their annoying things today. So that day I decided to turn on one street before mine and then cut through my back lane later. As I turn on the street, I see a man walking on the same sidewalk, going in the same direction. So I decided to go on the opposite sidewalk. He was quite tall and skinny, but about 30 to 40 feet ahead of me. And plus, he didn't see me, so I didn't think much of it. Now that night was very, very clear, and the stars were shining very brightly. So as I was walking, I decided to look up and admire them. I kept walking, and then I also stopped and took a picture, which turned out pretty nice, so I stood there looking at the stars for 20 seconds or so, and only then did I decide that it was time to carry on walking. I looked to see where the man was, and caught him turning left. I had to continue going straight, so I carried on going. Plus it was a very quiet night, so I figured I'd hear someone if they were behind me or anything. I live near a train track, and as I crossed the train tracks and took about 10 steps forwards, I heard a tapping noise behind me. I looked back and saw the same man from before speed walk about 35 feet behind me, tapping along the side of cars parked at the side. As soon as we made eye contact, he slowed down and looked up as if he were looking for something. I didn't want to assume anything yet, so I decided to start skipping, while also trying to be a bit faster. I looked behind me again, and the man was now 25 feet behind me. At this point I book it. I ran so fast because the back lane to my house was very close. As I was sprinting and went to turn the corner to get to my back lane, I looked to my side and saw the man running also. I legitimately felt my heart drop to my stomach, and I prayed I could quickly get to the front of my house. I ran, and thankfully got to the front, but didn't have my keys out. So, I'm like out of breath, panicking while looking for my keys at an ungodly speed, and finally, after what felt like hours but was truly mere seconds, I retrieved my keys, opened my door and slammed the door shut and locked it. I caught my breath before going up the stairs because I didn't want to freak my parents out. It's safe to say I won't be taking any late classes for a while. I'm a scrawny teenager who looks pretty sketchy most of the time. I've had weird encounters relatively often. I'm at the mall and there's a store called Spencer's. For those of you who don't know, their back wall is basically covered in adult toys. I'm walking out the store opposite from Spencer's and see a 35-year-old man with 2 4-year-old girls walk in. I don't know his name, so I'll call him Psycho. I try to help him out and say, "That's not the kind of store you want to bring little kids into." And the Psycho responds with, "Why don't you mind your own damn business?" I walk away about 15 feet before saying, "Because there's a wall of toys that they shouldn't see at the back," and continue walking away. I turn around to see his reaction, only to see Psycho start running towards me. I break into a sprint to hopefully not get ended by some random nutjob, and hear from behind me, "Get back here, you little loser." I turn my head to see how far he is, and his face is the color of a lobster. After running 100 meters or so, I don't see Psycho anymore and assume he went back to the 2 4-year-olds he left in that shop. I was sorely mistaken. It turns out someone called more security because a 35-year-old tried to grab a teenager, and the place was swarming with more cops by the time I headed back there to see what happened to the kids. They found him near the last area he'd seen me, still trying to find me, and escorted him out of the mall without his children. I still have no idea what happened to them. I was a high school student living with my mother in a 3rd-floor apartment. I used to sleep in the living room because the apartment only had 1 bedroom, and it was my mum's. I was happy with that little space. I was a happy kid. I always got up at 6 a.m. to go to school, and my mum always got up at 5 a.m. to have a shower and make breakfast before dropping me off at school and heading to work. That morning I woke up and all the lights were on, every single one of them, even the one in my room. I went to grab my phone, and strangely enough it wasn't there. I headed to the bathroom and saw all the drawers and doors and the furniture was all open. I was deeply confused. Anyway, my mum came out the bathroom and asked me what the hell I'd been doing. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about, and that I thought she did it since she was always up earlier than me, and asked her if she'd seen my cell phone. Then I saw it. Deep inside her green eyes, the realization. I could see the fear. All the pieces inside her head clicking in place. She leapt to the kitchen and found the window wide open, a kitchen knife on the ground, and some dusty fingerprints on the wall where someone put weight to climb inside. It was then, when my sleepy head put together the pieces. Someone somehow climbed all the way up our balcony, got inside our apartment and robbed us. All the while I was asleep in my bed right there in the living room. She hugged me and asked if I was okay. I said I never heard anything. Didn't even wake up when this unknown person turned the lights on and rummaged through our stuff. It was super weird. I have the lightest sleep since I have memory, and still do many years later. I don't dare to open my mum's bedroom door so she didn't notice anything. My grandma says that some angel protected me in my sleep and that's why I didn't wake up, but I don't believe in that kind of stuff. I don't think they knew I was there either. The police never found the robber, and we put steel bars on the windows and moved anyway sometime after that. This happened when I was in high school. At least 6 years have passed, and my mother and I moved from the apartment. I'm now grown and living with my boyfriend, but until today I'm still paranoid and keep thinking why I didn't wake up, though I am grateful that I did not. Just over a year ago, I split up with a very abusive ex-boyfriend, Kieran. He would be physically, verbally, and otherwise aggressive, and seemed constantly paranoid of being emasculated. This progressed to being paranoid about me even earning as much as him. I tried to be clear that I saw him as an equal, but it didn't matter. He fell further and further into the philosophy that women are the root of all evil. If ever there was a living, breathing caricature of genuine misogyny, he was it. I'm not a fighter, and he hated it. As he put it, the silence, the open void, hurts me more. He wanted me to fight back, but I never would. So, he would go to greater and greater lengths to assert dominance over me in one way or another. One incident was so extremely violent and calculated that I eventually reported it to the police, and with the help of an off-duty cop, due to the nature of the assault, it went straight to Crown Court, which is reserved for the worst offences in the UK. Nothing came of it. No eyewitnesses. It wouldn't have gone anywhere. I pressed it no further. I just wanted it marked up to help any future partners build a case that puts him away. if it ever happens again. This was the incident that tipped me towards making the decision to leave Kieran. It took some months, but I eventually did it. He made so many attempts to contact me that even the officers on my case raised an eyebrow. It was getting beyond borderline harassment. Long story short, this guy was not happy that he had lost me. He didn't care about my well-being. He cared about having me. I don't think I understand why to this day. Kieran kept vying for attention. He likes women of my political persuasion, and as I was known as an outspoken activist at the time, he began name-dropping my messages to other women in the same political circles. I thought that maybe he didn't think we knew each other at first, but then he started messaging friends. I tried to be cordial with all former partners, including him, so when he messaged me asking if another activist we followed was still online, I told him she was. Big mistake. Within the hour, she DM'd me. She received aggressive messages from him demanding photos and then demanding an explanation as to why she wouldn't oblige, because Kieran was my nice ex. I quickly told all other young female activists at my university in my hometown and my local party associations. Almost all came back to me saying they had indeed received messages from him. He was hounded off Twitter by a friend's boyfriend and deleted his account. I know how that feels, and I feel bad for it, but I don't regret the act of warning my friends, especially the more vulnerable ones. But then a new account was made. Kieran Mate 97. I only noticed because the first notification I remember getting the morning after was that this account had followed me. It had a photo of Kieran and a few sunny tweets shared by my fellow followers about how he was new to Twitter and wanted some friends. I spread the warning to some people and blocked the account, but before long there was another. I did the same and blocked them too. My mother started messaging me in confusion, sending me screenshots from her own Twitter. Kieran had found her anonymous account and was asking her about beans she had bought the other day. Knowing the things Kieran had said about her to me, and possibly others, she was upset and creeped out beyond compare. I advised she blocked him and he would tire himself out eventually. But there's one thing that I need to mention. One night I was messaging friends, having a nice night in with the housemates. Then my WhatsApp pinged. All of my family are on there, as well as a few busy activist groups, so I didn't think anything of it. Because of all the activist groups too, I wasn't alarmed that it was an unsaved number that had messaged me. It was probably a colleague. I opened the message. The only thing there was a dark photo of a house with an upstairs light on. I squinted to try and see if there was a joke in the photo. Why would someone send me this? I could see a figure in the window hunched over, something small in their hand. I could see the end of the terrace, the hedges, the shape of the gate, the pebble dash, the light car out front. It was my house. I forgot my merriment and messaged my friends. The conversation completely derailed, understandably. We scrambled to figure out who sent this to me, but by the time the second picture came in, I already knew. I didn't even look at it. Most of my uni friends at the time were competitive weightlifters, and they offered their house as safe refuge until I figured out what was happening. I sent a frantic, "What are you doing?" to Kieran, and he began typing immediately. He had been waiting. "Peeking," he replied. "It was a joke. Can you see that shadow? I'm not a bloody peeping Tom. I thought it was a joke when you first scared me crapless, but now I can't make sense of it. Oh no, that was just me actually watching my neighbor's shadow eating a pot noodle for entertainment, as if I'd come for you. You know how I think better than anyone." I examined the second picture closely. It wasn't mine. It looked very much like it. He hasn't messaged me since. No communication at all. I still don't understand what the purpose of that whole exercise was. I stayed in my house and left in the early afternoon for a friend's place the next day. For months afterwards, I was very careful about letting my landlady, neighbors, and friends know I was coming home. The doors and windows were always locked. I really don't know how he thinks. I hope I never see him again. I'm a female, and back when I was 18, 19 years old, I was house sitting with a girl I was studying with. The family we were house sitting for went to the same church as her, but I didn't really know them that well myself. It was more to keep her company in a huge house. This was 1997, when the average teen like me did not own a cell phone. During the week that we were house sitting, it was a short break in the school calendar, which is why this family was away and why the streets in the area were quieter than usual. My apartment, as well as the house we sat for, was not far from the university. My apartment was actually a 3-minute walk from it, and the house a further 5 minutes by car. So being a student neighborhood, it was particularly quiet this week. The first weird thing that happened the week I was at this house was that I dreamed I was driving through a dark forest on a windy, hilly dirt road with no lights anywhere except for those from my car's headlights. As I started to go down a hill, the headlights suddenly cut out and everything went dark. The car slowed down to a stop and died. I awoke. In the morning, I went out to my car and it wouldn't start. It had been working perfectly fine the day before, and I had to call a guy to come fix it. It was the starter motor. Well, that was the first creepy thing that happened that week. A day or two later, it was Friday. I planned on driving back home to my parents, who lived in a smaller town about 45 minutes away. I packed up my stuff at the big house and was going to head over to my apartment to collect whatever else I needed for the weekend. That trip between the house and the apartment was, as I mentioned, only 5 minutes or so away. Since it was winter, it was dark by the time I left at 7. As I was driving from the house, I noticed in my rearview mirror the headlights of the car behind me tailing very close. When I turned, it turned. Back then I was cautious, but not overly so. Cautious enough to notice, in such a short distance, that something strange was going on behind me. But then, when I pulled up to a traffic light, it wasn't there anymore, and I was struck with relief. However, it was short-lived. The car was now beside me. I looked to my right, and there was a man inside, alone, smiling at me, slightly maniacally. For a moment I thought, geez, I should drive with a beanie at night so people don't think I'm a petite 5'2" female with long blonde hair down to my waist, which is what I am. I also thought, well, he's in the lane to turn right, so I'm good. He pulled off and the headlights were behind me again, so close I could barely see them over the back of my car. What an arse, I thought. Who drives like that? Thank goodness my turn is coming up on the left soon. After another minute or two of this tailgating, I slowed down, strategically didn't indicate, and made a sudden sharp left into my driveway, opened the automatic gates and shot inside. The gates closed behind me, and the drama was over. I gathered a few things from the car to take up with me, and noticed on my way over to the stairwell that there was a man at the gate, just behind me. He was still on the other side, and I was at the far end of the parking lot, but I could make out it was the dude from the tailgating car. He was jumping up and down, shaking the gate with absolute rage. Well, I was safely on this side, so I wasn't completely gripped with fear, and besides, there was a group of students making a noise nearby, arriving for a party or something. I headed to the stairs and started going for the basement and ground level to the first floor. Rounding the stairs on the first floor, when I noticed someone running across the parking lot towards the staircase. In hindsight, I still can't fathom why I didn't put two and two together. I guess it's because I subconsciously knew that there was the group being let in through the pedestrian gate. As I was rounding the staircase between the second and third floor, someone suddenly touched me. I spun around. It was the guy. He had slipped in as part of the small crowd. He said something. I said something sassy back and told him to F off. Then I turned my back on him to continue up the stairs. I lived on the third and final floor. He grabbed me from behind, held my back against his chest with his arm around my neck, and I felt something being held against my right side. Oh crap. It was a knife. He led me down, and I remember thinking that the light was broken on the bottom level, and that this couldn't end well. But I was calm. I resisted slightly, but he tightened his grip. I felt like I wasn't getting enough oxygen and started to become a dead weight. He started to drop me. I was at groin level. I elbowed and it connected. He dropped me but spun around to face me, ripped the front of my buttons down top, and then he stopped. He looked at someone behind me, someone taller than him, and his eyes went wide. He turned around and ran. I screamed. Then I too turned around to see who had come to help, but no one was there. People came out of their apartments after that. The police were called, and this was the second time they were called there that night. Turns out other weird things have happened that my dad had already called the police about, and they had come past an hour before. As it turned out, they caught the guy. I identified him in a lineup. He committed sexual assault serially and was accused of doing it to 14 women. One had thrown herself out of the first floor of her apartment to get away from him and broken her leg. Weeks later, the police called me. Before his trial, his cell door had been left open. He was gone. Apparently, it was an inside job. This happened to me last summer when I was walking home at 4 a.m. My city is considered relatively dangerous by people from surrounding towns, but I've lived here my whole life and have never had much trouble, even when I lived in the most dangerous area. This, however, took place in the center of the city, which is considered safe. A friend and I were out drinking after a birthday party, so I was pretty smashed. After some beers, we eventually decided to go home. He lives in a totally different direction from me, so I had to walk home by myself. This is never a problem for me. I just put on my headphones and listen to some music while walking. As I'm walking beside a river towards the city mall, which is a big open concept building, I get passed by some guy that's staring at me quite creepily. I didn't think much of it. It's kind of a normal occurrence and it's usually harmless, so I let it go. I slow down a bit to change a song, and when I look up I see he's stopped walking completely a little further away from where I am now, and is quite obviously staring at me, waiting for me to get to the place he's at. Now, I'm not the kind of girl who would tolerate such behavior, and I always confront people like this. As it turns out, they get scared when confronted and usually leave. Having this in mind, I take off my headphones, and when I reach and pass him, he starts walking right behind me and speaking something to me. I stop and tell him to leave me alone, that I know what he's up to and I'm not interested. This annoys him a lot. I continue walking and he walks right behind me, yelling at me, cursing at me, saying all these kinds of horrible names. You think just because that you're a girl you're better than me? I don't give a crap about you. I'll end you. I hate people like you, and whatnot. In my drunken, pissed off state, I just say something back to him a few times, which of course doesn't go very well. But being harassed like this really hits a nerve with me and I can't stand it. I, however, start realizing that he's getting closer, and there's literally no one around that can help me if he does decide to attack me. So I'm a little bit angry and getting concerned. As we reach the end of the mall, he's almost right behind me, still yelling some obscenities, at which point I decide to call a friend and quite loudly tell her that some creep is following me and threatening me through the mall, and ask her to stay on the phone, in case something happens. He was getting even pissier after I got off the phone, as he was mocking me for it, but apparently they also got scared as he disappeared after a while. I guess he took a turn somewhere and carried on walking in another direction, but he was no longer yelling nor walking behind me. I stopped to take a breath and calm myself, and eventually exit the mall and reach a street where I see a cop car parked. I tried to report this to the cop sitting inside, but he told me to call 911 as this wasn't his problem and went to a nearby casino, while the girl cop just repeated what he said and basically told me to just go home and that there's nothing they can do. Eventually I did. Never saw the guy again. But thanks, crappy police officers. How this all began was me being nice to the people who come to my local community library. I was a casual worker, although people probably thought I was a part-timer, as not only was I spotted behind the desk checking in and out books, but also on my laptop abusing the Wi-Fi. This guy nicknamed Chesney was probably an influencer for the young adults, as he mainly skateboarded around and did whatever. He was never alone. I was a natural when it comes to customer service speaking and acting, so chances are I must have spoken to Chesney kindly enough he thought I was interested in him, or he became infatuated with me. I don't date anyone in or from my community. I explained to many people before that dating here would be full on Alabama. Chances are they could be my cousin through marriage or blood. It's disturbing as I'm Native American and can't even go west or south to date another guy, because chances are they might also be a long distance cousin. While my time at the library was long, just to gain work experience, it did not last when Chesney asked me to hang out with him. I declined the first time, but it didn't stop. One day he asked for my phone number, and I refused. I don't give out personal information like that. I have a low friend count. I'm not close to anyone who isn't within my immediate family, and my family can see BS as soon as it comes into their line of sight. Chesney then asked my supervisor for my number to give to him. How I came to know this is by the end of the day when we were closing up the library. My supervisor tells me that she'll keep an eye on him and that I should get home safely. I continue every day as normal, very ignorant to the situation that was now starting to build. One day I was sitting in my cubbyhole, as the patrons like to call it, and I started to notice Chesney would find a spot to sit where I would be in his line of sight. I ignored this until one day he came up to my cubbyhole and hands me this Magic the Gathering card. He didn't say much, but I was disturbed. I'll be honest, something about him didn't seem right. The card had an octopus on it, and then, right then and there, I placed the card down and gather up my things and leave. I didn't return to the library for 3 months, maybe even longer than that. This had taken place 2 years ago. I told my eldest sister about the incident, and my family were worried. They wanted to know the guy's name. However, I did not want to know his name. I didn't see him being important to remember. I didn't see him again until a year later. I'm doing more casual work at the library and basically forgot his face until one day he comes in and was working at a computer. I never gave him a second thought. I was busy reorganizing and stacking the bookshelves. Then he printed off a paper and came up to me and asked, "How do you get a job here at the library?" My reply was blunt. "You'll have to speak with my supervisor." I overheard my supervisor telling him he couldn't hand him his resume here, that he needs to hand it in over at HR at the band office. Never saw him again, as I got a job elsewhere. 2 years later, about 4 days ago, I'm living my life as normal when my mum texts me. "Hey, some guy's calling you and would like to speak to you. Is there no number to call back?" Not my time. Didn't call my number. Not worth a call back, Mum. I just answered the phone. I said I'd just pass the message on. She gives me the caller ID, but like an arse, I text her back saying the ID isn't familiar and there's no number to call back from. If someone wanted to speak to me, they would call or text me through my cell. Otherwise, it can't be important. And I ignore it. I was sitting at my local Timmy's when my eldest sister calls me and tells me that I have a stalker. It shook me a bit, but another part of me was amused, since I do have a tendency to think dark thoughts, and that this could be a joke. My sister explained to me that my stalker wanted to meet with me and take me out to dinner, that he wanted to hang out with me. She wasn't saying this seriously, which is why I thought she was joking. I didn't know who this guy was, and I tried to place a name and face to whoever this person was. Things were starting to get a bit annoying when my mum and elder sister started to accuse me of giving out my brother's number to a stranger. Why the hell would I do that? I barely have a social life. Whose number would I be giving it out to? When I went home, I went over to my brother's house. My mum, who was staying there, said he just called. Now my family's on high alert. By reverse number searching, I got an address where the number was coming from. I wasn't taking this seriously. Whoever they are, they lived outside the res. Me and my elder sister went to the address and did a drive-by. My sister enlightened up the mood by making jokes, pointing out to random guys who were walking down the road saying, "Oh, that must be your stalker. No, that one." Just saying, these guys walking around the road looked like your typical druggie or tweakers. Once we returned home, my amusement ended, as the accusations started up again. If I gave out my brother's number, being the concern. My elder sister asked, and demanded to know, but of course I had not done that. "Then how did your stalker get it?" she asked. "Well, he either got it from someone who knows our brother's home phone number or looked it up in the phone book," is what I concluded, as I know for damn sure I never gave out anyone's number. Once I got home, I was annoyed, immediately grabbed my brother's handphone and went outside to call this guy. My sister was walking to my other brother, filling him in on what was going on. It didn't take long for the guy to pick up. You can guess who it was. Chesney. Chesney was the one calling my brother's home and asking for me. I immediately started to tell him my family isn't amused and that I wasn't interested. Even when I said no, he kept on trying to ask me out. So I asked for his full name, which he gave, and told my siblings who it was. It's not my fault for living under a rock. Turns out this guy's an addict, if not a loser. And I told my parents and they told me to not even think of dating him and to just go and leave him alone. Thanks, Mum and Dad. I don't date anyone from the res. I did do a Facebook search, and of course he had to be a wannabe thug. Honest about doing hardcore drugs in his post, and I love that he has German blood, saying he's a Nazi and a descendant of the Führer. Nice. Getting up, I went to my brother's house who was home, annoyed, and I couldn't find the phone on the cradle. I asked my brother, who went to the incoming calls, pressed the number and handed it to me, which I immediately pressed call. And this guy didn't wait to pick up the phone. "Chesney?" Speaking. I was pissed and didn't use my customer service voice, that was gone. "You will cease and desist from calling this number ever again, or I will get the police involved. This is a form of harassment." Okay. I hung up, furious. My mother said something about calling the cops, but he was calling my brother's phone, not mine directly, and he hadn't done anything threatening yet. But still, I really hope not to meet that guy again. Pathetic, worthless, and annoying. Does anyone remember, back in 2016 there was a big thing about killer clowns? Well, I didn't believe any of it. I thought it was a big joke. Until it happened to me. Here's my story. I was in 10th grade when the whole clown thing happened. I didn't really believe it. I thought it was just a big joke. Just a bunch of losers that had nothing better to do than scare people on Halloween. Well, one night, I was walking home from my boyfriend's house. It was a far walk, but I liked getting out as much as I could and looking forward to my long walk home. When I finally got to the east end of town near the East Court Mall, halfway home, I saw a group of people standing in the parking lot in the dark. They started yelling at me. Now I was a 16-year-old female and was used to guys yelling at me or catcalling me. At first I thought it was a joke, just another group of guys yelling at me from across the street, because they have nothing better to do, and of course, male bravado. I just shook it off, when I noticed that 2 of them were walking towards me. I couldn't make out their faces at first, until they got a bit closer, and were now walking behind me. I keep hearing them yell at me, but the second time they did it, they started laughing like psychopaths, and laughing like clowns. I looked back to see that they were both wearing clown masks, and I could see behind them were at least 3 more clowns. I didn't want to panic or show them I was scared, so I walked a bit faster until I got to the end of my street. I didn't want them to see where I lived, so I made a wrong turn and walked up to a house and pretended to go inside. I hid behind a bush to see them walk right by me, until I heard one of them yell out a horrifying clown laugh, and a few others followed. Then another clown was yelling at me. "I'll find you, pretty lady. Come on, come out and play. We know where your street is, and we will find you." They finally left, and I went home. But a few hours later, I was getting a snack before bed, and I happened to look out my kitchen window to see the group of clowns walking past my house. When I was 7, I went to the mall with my mother and brother, who was 14. For some background, my brother wasn't the most alert and attentive human being, and my mother probably still trusted him a little bit too much. I recall my mum going into a women's clothing store, and when my tween brother saw bras and thongs, he probably decided to leave the store, with me following. My mum approved because he was old enough, I guess. I'm not entirely sure how me and my brother separated, but at one point I watched him going to a store, while I was left alone just wandering about. I distinctly remember seeing a Pikachu stuffed animal that drew my attention, and I began to ascend towards it. As I levitated towards the massive Pokemon, almost in a trance, some kid, about 16 and way taller than me, stood over me and yelled right at my face. His eyes were lit up and genuinely seemed crazy, at least to 7-year-old me. I started to look around for my mother or brother to magically appear, but for the first time in my life, I was in a situation where I was entirely alone. He kept asking me if he wanted me to see him rip open the Pikachu and watch his blood pour out. He then asked me where my mum was. That's when he realized I was all alone. This was the opportunity for a psycho teen to truly mess with a 7-year-old. He pushed the envelope explaining what sex was, describing 9/11 to me and a few other wildly inappropriate topics that made me choke up and almost beg out for help. Being a 7-year-old, I didn't have that kind of gut reaction and just stood by the Pikachu, and I remember holding the stuffed animal's hand just for any type of support. Then, as suddenly as this guy came in, he left. He walked away and out my line of vision, and I ran in the opposite direction towards where I came from, and ran into my brother. I didn't say a single thing, and being the inattentive kid he was, he didn't realize my misery. We then walked back to my mum, where I faked being okay. I felt safe being with them, and virtually forgot about what had just happened. We decided to get a milkshake and head towards the escalators. As we go up, dread overwhelms me. At the top, I see him again. He's standing there with 2 other kids. The other kids were laughing and looking at their friends, but he wasn't smiling. He just stared at me as I rode towards them with my family, who had no idea what was going on. As we inched towards this group, the dread increased simultaneously, as I realized all the friends had baseball bats. What the hell? Were they gonna hit me? Were they gonna attack my family? I walked behind my mother as we walked past them, and his friends sniggered. After my mum and brother got a milkshake, for some reason I had lost my appetite, my mum said it was time to go home, that she needed to prepare dinner for my father. I frantically looked around to make sure those kids weren't following me. I ride the escalator down, hoping my safety, until I hear laughing again. I look around and saw his little group, but they weren't holding baseball bats, and the leader of the group wasn't present. I stood in horror riding the escalator, hoping that this would just end already. When we reached the bottom of the escalator, the friends turned right and kept walking. Then they turn around and one kid yells, "Hey kid," and points to the elevator right next to me. The kid was standing there, bat in hand, just staring at me 5 feet away. This is when I lose it and start crying uncontrollably. My mum going off on them, saying that they should be ashamed for even talking to me and to mind their own business. We head home, and I remember crying in my bed because I was terrified that this kid would just teleport into my room, in the same way that it seemed he was appearing everywhere I was in the mall. Creepy mall rats, let's not meet again, because my mum might just beat the crap out of you. I was accused of being a stalker. Did I do what I was accused of? Yes. But let me take you to how this started. I was home making dinner. The only 3 other people that were in the house were my 5-year-old son, his friend, and our foreign exchange student, Tina, who was 15 and extremely shy and didn't like talking because she didn't think she spoke English very well. I'm making dinner, as I said, and have my hands buried in a meatloaf and the phone rings. I wipe my hands and answer the phone, and some lady's yelling at me. I can't understand her. She keeps yelling, and I got the words son, police, kick, ass. She hung up, and I was standing there with the phone in my mostly wiped hand, very confused. I resumed my meatloaf when the phone rang again. It was the same lady who was a little calmer and said, "Stop calling here. My son doesn't want anything to do with you. I already called the police." And I said, "You've been calling me. I didn't call you. I don't even know who you are." "The police will contact you and throw you in jail. I hope you rot in there." I didn't know what this lady was doing or where she was getting her information from. I was making dinner, my son was playing with a friend in the next room, and Tina was studying. Later the same day, the police department called, asking if they could come over and speak with me. We set up a time and I'm almost in tears. Keep in mind I'm in my mid-30s and didn't even pull pranks when I was young. I was one who always followed the rules and taught my kids the same thing. And now I'm being accused of being a stalker? This may not seem scary, but I was terrified, thinking this lady is going to have me thrown in jail without so much as an explanation from me. Not that I had one. I was confused. 2 officers pull up and I open the door. They asked me to lock up my dogs as I had 3 Great Danes at the time, so I lock them up out back and come back to the door and tell them to come in. The kids were at the neighbor's house because I didn't want them to see me being arrested if it came to that. We sit at the kitchen table, and I get them each a bottle of water, with them asking about who lives here, and where they are, and I'm sitting there shaking visibly. I'm so nervous, my mouth is dry and I can't swallow, and I can barely speak. Just then my husband comes home. He's the one who can talk anyone calm, and practically could sell oil to Saudi Arabia. He's so smooth. He's talking to the officers, and even though he wasn't here, he knows I'm not stalking anyone, and that these accusations are ridiculous. They say the person said I called them and hung up. I said I was making a meatloaf and answered the phone with meatloaf residue on my hands, and some lady began yelling at me. And I only understood some police, kick and ass, and she hung up. And then she called back, and I understood her better, and she said that I was going to jail and her son didn't want anything to do with me. And finally the officer says, "Well, I don't think you had anything to do with this, but she has your number, so someone called. Do you think your kids have anything to do with this?" I told him my little one was playing with a friend in the dining room, which I could see at all times, and my foreign exchange student was studying at the time, and she's quiet and there's no way she would stalk someone. Plus, I was right next to the phone. There was another phone in my bedroom and no one ever went there, so it couldn't have happened. They gave me the phone number I was supposed to have called and didn't recognize it. So they asked if they could speak to Tina, who was 15. She was shy, and I didn't really want to scare her, and they said they would just calmly speak to her, so I said okay. She came out, sat at the table with us, and they were asking her name, how she liked it there, and if she made any friends, and if she called any friends today. She said that she didn't, but then she said that she tried to call Jamie, but went over there instead but came back home because everyone was upset about someone stalking their son. We came to find out she plugged an old phone into the jack in her room and it worked, so she called from there, and she hung up after 2 rings because she decided to walk over there since they live 4 houses away. My neighbors were getting calls from one of their son's ex-girlfriends, and Tina just happened to call at the same time, and they hit *69 and called my house thinking that I was the stalker. Now *69 was very new and I didn't know about it at the time. We had a huge laugh when the police called, then told them that I was not the stalker. It was their neighbor, who they knew, and we were cool. Me and my family were on holiday, and we were doing some clothes shopping in the mall. We had driven for a fair amount of time, so we all decided to stop at the bathrooms. As per usual, the girls' toilets have a queue, whereas the male toilets had no line. So me and my mom were waiting in line while my younger brother had gone in, finished, and gone outside to wait. My brother was outside on his own for around 5 minutes. He is 15, so this is no problem at all. When we come out, we all head off to go to another shop when we hear a man shouting at my brother aggressively. We all turn around, and this man was poking my brother in the chest, getting up in his face, and shouting things at him like, "You need to get that off your phone," and "You're a sicko." Visibly confused, my brother, with him being pretty much the sweetest guy you could ever meet, me and my mum knew that whatever this guy was accusing him of, he had something wrong. Eventually, we get to the guy and get him to calm down and explain what's going on. He starts spouting off that the game he is playing hurts me and he is causing damage, and that he's a sicko. The guy couldn't tell us what exactly my brother was doing that affected him, which was red flag number 1. And it is where this encounter began to go from creepy to unnerving. How come he can't tell us what game is hurting him, or tell us anything about it? He starts pulling at his trouser leg and shows us his leg, pointing at them, saying, "This is what people like you have done to me. I try to show the doctors, but they send me to a psych every time." The thing is, there was nothing wrong with this dude's legs at all. They were normal looking with no signs of harm or injury. As this man was saying, me and my mum kind of looked at each other with a "Are you serious?" kind of look, and we both thought we were missing something major. He then starts to threaten us with, "I could have a hammer and I could attack you right now. In fact, I should because of what you did to me." The hammer thing goes on for a while, and he gestures hitting my brother across the face with a hammer for most of it. Eventually we managed to leave by apologizing and walking away quickly. It seemed like going along with this guy's accusations would make him stop harassing us. It made me really sad because obviously this man needed help that he wasn't getting, and it has left my brother slightly terrified about going places without us nearby. This happened when my friend Emma and I were both 14, and we were out clothes shopping as teenage girls do during the summer. One thing I should mention is that our town is essentially arse end of nowhere, in Canada, and was just named one of the most impoverished towns in the province. A majority of its residents are under the poverty line. Our only strong production is farming. Our high school was one of the worst in the province. Most businesses are closed down or closing, so you can imagine what kind of people live here. When Emma and I were leaving the mall, we had to walk down this extremely long street to get back to the main street to our parents. It was a hike for our tiny legs, and especially worse in 35 degrees Celsius heat. So whenever we hung out, we always took breaks on this road. On this street was a strange assortment of connected houses, where 7 to 8 houses squished together almost like apartments. I always found them weird because they were the only houses on that plot of land. The nearest building were businesses quite a ways away. When we passed by and saw a group of stray kittens playing behind the houses, we beelined for them and all those precious kitten snuggles. Emma had bought a bag of Lay's chips, and I had gotten a BLT from Tim Hortons. So for lack of anything better, we fed the kittens chips, bread bits and bacon and pet them. Some guy noticed us and came out of the house on the far end where the kittens were. I can't remember his name, but it was something like Bernard, or something equally old school. He looked pretty unusual. A big guy with a big nose that looked like it had a cherry growing underneath it, wearing no shirt, which wasn't weird because it was hot as hell. He started talking to us, and we weren't weirded out at this point. He was polite, sitting on the picnic table and feeding the kittens real cat food, talking about how Mama Kitty probably hadn't made it, because the kittens had been on their own for a while, and how he fed them and they thanked him with snuggles just like us. He went back inside and we kept playing with the kitten fluffs. Emma and I ended up just chilling there with the kittens in our laps, chatting about teenage girl things, until about 20 minutes later when Bernard returned, with a friend, Steve, who was also shirtless. I remember getting a little uncomfortable with this guy because he also had no shirt, but started talking to me, suggesting I take off my jacket since it was so hot. Steve pointed to Emma saying she looked good. She was smart because she only had a skirt and tank top, her jacket tied around her waist. We just laughed it off and kept making polite conversation, but at this point we'd been there an hour and just wanted to meet our parents on the main street. At one point, I ended up turning around during a lull in the conversation only to find the back door open and a third guy standing in the doorway watching us. I remember this bit vividly because of how eerie it was. He was in full shadow, and I couldn't see anything about his face except his long hair and his skinny twig of a body, also shirtless. This guy was still as a statue, just watching us in the darkness of the house like a horror movie villain. Emma and I were like, nope, but we're just trying to get out of the conversation with Steve and Bernard. And then Bernard got weird. He asked us if we wanted to come in for a cold drink, which of course we refused. We were not going into that house. You should come inside. I have a friend in there who had an accident. His whole stomach had to be taken out. It's cool. You should come see him. I don't know how he thought that would get two girls to come inside, instead of just nope the hell out of there. And of course, we graciously declined his offer. You should come in. It'll make him feel better to see you. Bernard kept pushing. I think we saw him earlier standing in the doorway, I said. It wasn't meant to be accusatory, but he took it that way. Oh, I'm sure he was just listening to the conversation, he said playfully. Steve actually said, we're not creepy, promise. Yeah, you are, weirdo. We assured them we knew, but said we had to go and thank them for letting us pet their kittens. We were relieved when they said goodbye and went inside, shutting the door behind them. You would hope this is where things end. Of course, it was not. Emma and I started walking back down the road towards the main street with our things, talking about how weird that was. I remember I was texting my boyfriend at the time being like, hey, this weird thing happened, how messed up is that? Then Emma hit my arm and I almost dropped my phone. But before I could tell her off, she looked at me and said deadpan serious, they're following us. Like the genius I was, I turned around too to find them 10 feet from us, smiling and staring straight at us. They didn't call out to us, even when we saw them. They just kept following these teenage girls on a nowhere road. We immediately locked arms in case they attempted to grab one of us. I'm not entirely sure what our logic was if they attempted to take us. They'd get us both at once? Perhaps there's safety in numbers. All that I knew was that I didn't want to leave each other behind. And I frantically messaged my boyfriend asking what to do. He said to run and dial 911. So I called while we power walked the street, trying not to seem too obvious. When I gave the street, the operator told us There was actually a police station on that street. It used to be on the main street, but they apparently moved to a new building recently, and we were amazed by our luck. We stayed on the phone with her while we half walked, half ran down the street until we spotted it. We immediately turned in, but the front door was locked for some reason, so we panicked and bolted behind the station to hide behind some bushes. The operator was very nice and told us to stay down until a police officer came to get us, which they did a few minutes later. Despite how terrible most of the services are in our town, Emma and I have to give props to the police officers who were very professional and concerned about us. One officer mentioned he saw the two guys passing by and went to talk to them, presumably telling them it's stupid to stalk 14-year-old girls. We called our parents to come collect us at the station, a little freaked out but relieved to be safe. It was only later that we learned what the houses were for. They were halfway houses for people on probation. There were a lot of people who were violent, drug users, and perverse who lived in that complex. That's why it was separated from other residences and seemed so randomly placed. Every time I walked by that place, I crossed the street and warned my friends about it. Our mums told their connections of other mums' friends to do the same. So redneck jail creeps, let's never meet again. This story happened when my best friend and I were 15. We had to take an important exam at the end of the year, and consequently attended some private sessions in order to prepare. Because of this, we would only hang out on Saturdays after 5. We were at the mall, and after a bit of window shopping, she asked me to come outside into the park, so she could smoke a cigarette. She took it from her mother, but I didn't smoke. I have never liked it. I accepted it, as I was used to her requirement. So we were in the mall's park, walking while she smoked the cigarette. It was roughly 6, but was already dark outside. Let me describe where we were at. This was a large park full of trees and big rectangular-shaped bushes. On the side aisle there was some restaurants, a full 10-meter gap, an exit to the dark street and to the parking lot, another big space, and a place for skating. We thought we were 100% safe, as we were still walking on the mall's property. We arrived near that strange exit, when a 5'9" man approaches us and asks for a cigarette. My friends tell him that she doesn't have any other cigarettes because she got it from someone else too. He seemed to be in his late 40s, was unshaven and wearing a red hoodie, which almost covered his eyes. I tell him that we have to go, to which he responds with some incoherent words. We both knew something was off, so we made some steps back. "Why? You scared? I won't do anything to ya," he said as he was approaching. "Don't worry, I've met a lot of girls like you," he said, and then started to mumble something else. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know if he had a weapon, and behind us was a big bush, and in front of us was him. If we chose to run in different directions, he would be able to catch at least one of us and probably take her with him. There weren't many people, but the ones who were passing by didn't seem to care about our terrified looks. My friend starts to repeat that she was sorry, but she couldn't help him, and I think that one of the passers-by heard her. Fortunately, a man of about 6'3", who looked a lot younger and stronger than the creep, stopped and asked him why he was bothering us, but he wasn't giving any response. My friend took her chance, crushed her cigarette with her foot as quickly as possible and began running. I, as a complete idiot, remained frozen for a few more seconds and looked into our saviour's eyes, and only then did I start sprinting. We didn't stop running until we were sure that they couldn't see us anymore. Both of them left, and we got back into the mall safely and never told anyone about this creepy encounter. One time I was at the mall to play Magic the Gathering. I was 15 years old at the time and had just finished up around 9:30. I called my mom and she was on her way to come pick me up. I lived 30 minutes away, so I had some time to kill. I live in a relatively small town, so everything closed at 9. I was waiting outside of Starbucks, and there was an old lady with a dog sitting at a table smoking. I walked up to her and asked her if I could pet her dog. People in Hawaii tend to be nice, and I'm a relatively social person. She said yes and that she loves people, so I reach in to pet the dog. The dog starts barking at me, which is unusual because animals usually love me. She then proceeds to tightly grasp my hand and put it in front of the dog's face and says that I'm nice, etc. to the dog. She then tells me it's good to pet the dog, and I slowly reach to pet the dog, and at that moment it bites my hand. She yells at the dog and asks me if I would like to hit her cigarette. She asks me my name, and I tell her, "Oh, that's my son's name," she says, and then points to the 20-something off buff Hawaiian dude sitting on the table over. He was silent the entire time until that moment. He still said nothing and just kind of stared me down. At this point I was thinking of an exit strategy. She then asked me if she knew where she could score some weed. Then she tells me I could be a model and she knows a casting agent. By that point another man walks up to her and they all start whispering to each other. I got a text from my mum, and as my headphones were in, my phone read them out to me, that she was on the other side of the mall. While they were distracted speaking to each other, I book it to the other side. I was speed walking when I noticed two men following me. I then run as fast as I could into my mum's car, get in, and see the two men walking towards me. My mum was on the phone and starts driving away. 10 minutes later, when she's off the phone, I tell her what happened and she called the cops. They asked us the address and said that they will send over people and get my statement, but they never did. So, creepy lady and her dog? Let's not meet again. I was getting the bus home from work and decided to get off at a shopping centre/mall instead of the stop at my house because I needed a few things. While on the bus, a man was sitting behind me. Now I know this sounds strange, but from the moment I got on the bus, I felt strange about him and could feel and could also see in the reflection of the bus window that he was literally staring at me for the entire 50-minute bus journey, not looking away once. And I felt unsettled about him, but told myself not to be silly and shook it off. When I got off the bus, he started walking the same way I was. This is a busy town, so there were a lot of people walking that way, so I didn't think anything of it. I then walked past around the shopping centre and could see him right behind me in the reflection of the windows. I tried to shake this feeling that he was following me, and I took a sharp left into the next shop. Guess what? So did he. I then walked over to the woman's clothes and he followed me. I walked straight to the woman's shoes and he followed me. I walked back on myself and went back to the clothes, and he was watching me the whole time, even making it obvious at this point that he was now following me, staring at me and smiling as if this were a game. At this point I said to him, as I felt comfortable as we were in a busy shop, "Are you okay? Is there something you want?" He didn't say anything and just smiled at me really creepily. At this point I was fed up, so I walked out the shop and he followed me. I rang my friend and loudly, so that she could hear, said, "Hey Mary, there's a friend following me all around the shop centre, can you come and meet me?" And at that he ran off, literally ran, and I didn't see him again. I was really shaken. The scary thing is that my house is in the middle of nowhere, with no houses or cars nearby, and I kept thinking of what would have happened if he got off at the same stop as me and followed me down that country road. This happened about 2 years ago, and still makes me a little afraid to walk around the mall by myself. I had just turned 14 at the time, and my cousin was with me who was 13. I look a lot older than I am, but my cousin looks her age. We're both really short, but my body and face is way more developed than hers. My mum dropped my cousin and I off at the mall during my little sister's soccer game, and she would pick us up after. We had about 2 hours to kill, and this mall was pretty big, so there wasn't going to be an issue. Cut to about an hour in, and a man, probably of about 20 years old, comes up to us. "Can I get your Snapchat?" he asks. My cousin and I give each other a glance, and I politely say, "No." "Come on, seriously?" I shake my head and tell him again, "No," and my cousin and I start to walk away from him. "Don't walk away from me, you're a beautiful girl and I just want to get to know you." My cousin and I start walking a little faster, but this does not stop him. "I have a boyfriend," I say sternly, even though I didn't. He walks in front of us, trying to get us to stop. "Then at least let me be your friend." He smiles, looking me up and down. "No," I say louder, alerting the people around us that something was going on. My cousin and I walked away, trying to lose this guy, but he persisted. He followed us, and we even went into a store to try and get rid of him. While we go through this store, he's still begging me to give him my Snapchat. I keep ignoring him and found a security guard not too far ahead in the store we were in. I started to approach him and the guy took a hint and finally ran off. I reported him to the security guard and explained what happened. Not sure if anything came of it, but still, the creep who tries to hit on a minor, let's not meet. I was sitting at the mall eating lunch one day, waiting for my boyfriend at the time to show up. I was alone, which is normal, and wasn't fazed. What wasn't normal was when I looked up and saw a group of 5 or 6 guys approaching me and sit down with me at my table, and the table next to me, at all angles without asking. They were constantly looking around, acting really sketchy, and were badgering me to talk to them, and I felt really awkward. They kept trying to talk to me, and were giving me creepy compliments, asking for my number, the usual. So of course, despite having my phone directly in my hands, I was like, "Sorry, I don't have a phone," hoping they would get the hint. When they told me they were in their early 20s and late teens, they asked me how old I was, and I replied with 16. Luckily, shortly after, cops and more cops showed up and immediately made it clear that I was uncomfortable and not involved with them. Apparently they were stealing and causing trouble all over the mall. Thankfully they were removed from the mall and my boyfriend ended up showing up shortly after. Everything turned out okay, and I don't think they were going to actually try to hurt me with a bunch of people around, but you never know. It was definitely freaky for sure.